Chapter 218. After Zhang Yan took the token, junior sister Guanrong would send him off the spirit peak. When they reached the mountain gate, they saw a streak of light flying out from a temple, and in the blink of an eye, it arrived in front of the two. It was Gong Sun Mian who saw Zhang Yan leaving the spirit peak and thus hurried over. Seeing that Zhang Yan was fine, he heaved a sigh of relief in his heart and went forward to greet him. "Brotherly, you've finally come out." After Zhang Yan entered the mountain, there was no news of him for 7 to 8 days. Gong Sun Mian did not know the inside story, and even when he asked junior sister Guanrong, she did not know anything. These few days, he was very uneasy. If Zhang Yan's background was really found to be problematic, not only would he not be able to escape, if anything happened to the Yu siblings, would the Yu clan let him off? Fortunately, Zhang Yan had come out safe and sound, and he did not have to live in fear anymore. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and smiled. "A few days ago, I had a congenial conversation with the seniors in the temple, so I stayed for a few more days. I've made Brother Gong Sun wait for a long time." Gong Sun Mian waved his hands and said, "It's all right, it's all right. It's good that brother is fine." "Oh right?" He took out a letter from his sleeve and handed it to Zhang Yan. With a strange expression, he said, "This is the invitation that Yu Hongzhang wrote for brother, saying that he is inviting brother to attend a meeting at the Nine Dragons Lake, but he sent it to me. I don't know what he's up to, so I don't dare to act on my own, so I can only hand it over to brotherly to handle." After Yu Hongzhang made up his mind to befriend Zhang Yan, he initially waited patiently for a day or two, but after that, he lost interest and ordered his maidservant to deliver a letter. Ignoring Han Guzi's instructions, he swaggered away. After receiving the letter, Zhang Yan did not even look at it. He threw it into his sleeve and left the mountain gate with Gong Sun Mian. The two of them landed in front of the bamboo forest. Zhang Yan took out the pouch and poured it down. The unconscious Yu siblings rolled out and said, "Since the talisman is in my hands, I won't make things difficult for fellow Taoist Gongsuan's two juniors. Everything that happened before will be written off." Gong Sun Mian smiled bitterly and helped the two siblings up. Although the two siblings were cultivators, their cultivation was low and they were unconscious in the sack. They didn't know how to regulate their breath and qi. They didn't eat or drink for 7 to 8 days, so they probably didn't feel good. At this moment, Zhang Yan's gaze flashed, and he seemed to have sensed something and said, "Taoist brother Gongsun, I have some matters to attend to, so I'll be leaving first. I'll be staying at Baofeng Monastery before the treasure meet, and that blazing dragon tongue grass will probably need another 100 days to mature. At that time, Taoist brother can come and collect it." Gong Sun Mian hurriedly said, "All right, senior brother, if you have something to attend to, you can go. I'll come to visit Taoist brother another day." The two of them bowed to each other and Gong Sun Mian held the Yu sisters under his arms. He stepped on a ball of mysterious light and flew southwest. After he left, Zhang Yan waved his hand and a talisman flew toward him. He raised his wrist and caught it in his hand. These few days, he was in the Purple Bamboo Mountains dojo. There was a restriction outside the monastery, so the talisman couldn't enter. However, his talisman was used by the Clear Feather sect, so it was different from a normal talisman. If it couldn't find a messenger, it would take the initiative to attach itself to the birds and beasts nearby until its spiritual qi was exhausted. Zhang Yan opened the talisman and saw that it was a letter from Zhang Pan. A night had passed since the letter was sent. After reading the letter, he frowned and a trace of coldness flashed across his eyes. He stood up and turned into a rainbow as he flew toward Baofeng Monastery. The Qin couple had been protected by Zhang Pan for more than a month, so their days were peaceful. However, in the middle of the night last night, they suddenly heard a commotion in the hall. It sounded like someone was fighting and shouting. However, the noise quickly dissipated. When they helped each other out, they saw Zhang Pan standing in the middle of the hall with a corpse at his feet. The corpse's face could not be identified. Chen Jisher was so scared that his face turned pale. He retreated and almost fell to the ground. Chen Fujin was bold. He pushed away the maid beside him and walked to Zhang Pan. He bowed and said, "Little Taoist, what happened?" Zhang Pan said in a low, muffled voice, "This man and a Taoist came here in the middle of the night and sneaked into your room. They must be up to no good." I went up to ask them but they wanted to attack me. I killed them with one punch. Chen Fujin asked, "What about that Taoist?" Zhang Pan said in a muffled voice, "That Taoist's feet seemed to be smeared with oil. He was very slippery. He has already escaped." Chen Fujin asked again, "Did he say anything before he left?" Zhang Pan thought for a moment and said, "No." Qin Jishir could be said to have gained a lot of experience over the past few days. After the initial panic, he slowly regained his composure. He stepped forward to hold Chen Fujin's hand and comforted her. "Wife, it might be a thief who came to steal our property." Chen Fujin shook his head and said, "If this servant's guess is correct, this must be Ma Daojin's accomplice, and they are here to avenge him." In fact, she vaguely knew in her heart that the other party was here for the soul-gathering bell, but if this matter were to be mentioned, her cowardly husband would definitely force her to give it away. She also planned to leave it for her unborn child, so she did not mention this matter at all. She frowned and thought for a moment. She turned to Zhang Pan and said, "Little Taoist, do you have the ability to send a message to Taoist Zhang?" Zhang Pan said loudly, "Master has already told me that if there is any abnormality, regardless of whether it is big or small, I must inform him immediately. I have already sent a letter to Master." Hearing this, Madame Chen breathed a sigh of relief. She held her abdomen and took 2 steps forward. Suddenly she said, "That Taoist must have come this time because he doesn't know what you're capable of. That's why he wasn't prepared. If he brings his accomplices here again, I'm afraid it won't be so simple. It looks like we can't stay here anymore." Qin Jishir opened her mouth and asked blankly, "Then where to?" Chen Fujin said decisively, "To Baofeng Monastery. We will leave now." Zhang Pan did not mind and said, "Both of you leave first. I will take care of the corpse here." His method was nothing more than to swallow the corpse. However, he did not want the Chen couple to see it in case they were scared out of their wits. "Alright." Chen Fujin made a prompt decision. Although she did not know if the other party would return, the longer they stayed here, the more dangerous it would be. For the sake of the child in her belly, she could not take the risk. She immediately dragged Qin Jishir back to the room to tidy up. After she had tidied up a few changes of clothes and a few pieces of jewelry, she looked back and saw that Qin Jishir was still carefully stroking the things in the box. She could not help but be angry. She reached out and threw the things aside. She complained, "Husband, you don't have to bring these stupid things. You can take them when you come back." Qin Jishir hurriedly picked up the things and scolded, "Wife, what you said is wrong. How can these things be useless and stupid? You must know that these are the words of a sage. How can you give them up so easily?" Chen Fujin was secretly annoyed and said, "The more you read, the more you will understand. Why is he becoming more and more pedantic? When my child is born, I must send him to Taoist Zhang to learn the Tao. I cannot be like him." She also knew that she could not persuade him. She quickly called for her maidservant, Xiao, and ordered her to go to the entrance of the village to borrow a mule cart to transport goods for the Taoist temple. She also told her that they were fleeing and that the price was more than 10,000, so she could not be calculative. The 3 of them dawdled for about 2 hours before they finished tidying up. They left the village and went to Baofeng Temple. However, after traveling for a few miles, the heavens were not in their favor. It began to drizzle and not long after, the road became muddy. Because of this, their progress became slower. At the same time, the Taoist who was beaten away by Zhang Pan ran all the way to an earth temple. Only then did he stop, gasping for breath. He patted his numb legs and quickly took out a few broken sticks of incense. He picked out a few long sticks and placed them on the altar. He then lit them and took out a talisman paper to burn. Then, he took 2 steps back and said respectfully, "Your disciple invites Grand Uncle Master to come." A short while later, a ray of light flashed and landed in front of him. It was a middle-aged Taoist. He was short and wore a sun scarf on his head. His face was mostly covered by a round brim. Only his long beard fluttered in front of his chest. He wore a green Taoist robe, white socks, and a pair of shoes. He held an inconspicuous tarpaulin umbrella in his hand. The Taoist hurriedly bowed and said in shame, "Grand Uncle Master, I have failed you." The middle-aged Taoist said carelessly, "Min Chong, You said you would bring me good news in the next few days. But now I have rejoiced for nothing. Min Chong hurriedly knelt down and said with a sad face, Grand Uncle Master, it is not that I did not try my best. The Qin couple had a powerful Taoist child protecting them. Even young Master Feng Steward Ji was killed by him. When Min Chong and Steward Ji heard of Ma Daojin's death, although they knew the Qin couple were on the other side of the river, they did not dare to make a move because they had some relationship with Baofeng Temple. But they did not leave and kept looking for an opportunity. Just a few days ago, their spies in Baofeng Temple heard that monastery head Lu had gone on a journey. They were overjoyed. They were only afraid of Lu Yaoying. Since he was not here, what else was there to worry about? That was why the two of them went to find the Qin couple last night, wanting to force them to reveal the whereabouts of the soul-gathering bell. They had originally thought that they had a 90% chance of success, but they never expected that even though the Qin couple were mortals, Zhang Pan was a demon in human form. Steward Ji was beaten to death on the spot. If not for Min Chong's 1,000 miles godly strider talisman and his quick feet, he might not have been able to return. The middle-aged Taoist suddenly asked, You said that Lu Yaoying went on a journey? Is this true? Min Chong hurriedly said, There is no mistake. I heard that Daoren has been gone for 7 or 8 days. The middle-aged Taoist nodded. Although the soul-gathering bell in the Qin couple's hands was not a powerful artifact, it was a part of a certain artifact in his sect. He had to get it back. Originally, he ordered Ma Daojin to retrieve it, but he was killed. He was worried that Daoren was protecting the couple. He also knew that the Taoist was a mystic light realm cultivator like him, so he did not make a move. Now that Lu Daoren was gone, he had no more worries. What could a Taoist child do? So he said, Fine, since I'm already here today, I'll go with you and retrieve the spirit-gathering bell. Min Chong flattered, If Martial Granduncle is here, it will be a piece of cake. The middle-aged Taoist did not comment. He picked Min Chong up and a ray of light appeared under his feet. He walked towards the Qin couple's previous residence. To be continued. Target equals, understood. Chapter 219. Shi Yangzi, the middle-aged Taoist, and Min Chong traveled leisurely on the conveyance light towards the river bank. In a short while, they had crossed the river and arrived at the village where the Qin couple lived. He looked around and saw that there were hundreds of farmers. Chickens and dogs could be heard everywhere. Only the east side of the village had a huge house with white walls and tiles. Min Chong pointed at the house and said, This is where the Qin couple lived. The middle-aged Taoist was not in a hurry. He stood in the air and looked at the house for a while. Then he brought Min Chong down from the cloud. However, when they landed in the yard, they realized that the place was empty. Min Chong listened carefully. He entered the house and circled around. Then he hurriedly ran out and said, Grand Uncle Master, they left not long ago. If we go after them now, we will definitely be able to catch up. The middle-aged Taoist did not say a word. He stared at the puddle of black blood under his feet. Min Chong was stunned. He took a few glances and sighed, Steward Ji was beaten to death by that ugly kid here. The middle-aged Taoist stretched out his hand and took a whiff of the turbid yellow qi of the earth. He sniffed it and said in a low voice, There's demonic aura. Min Chong was stunned. Demonic aura? The middle-aged Taoist scoffed. The Qin couple are mortals. If no one else came here just now, the demonic aura might have come from the kid. Min Chong was confused. Could it be some kind of demon? The middle-aged Taoist lifted his sun scarf a little and revealed a pair of sharp eyes. He said, Based on the demonic aura, it is just a small demon that has not transformed for a long time. But I believe it was sent by Daoren to protect the couple before he left. But I don't care about it. Min Chong, I will go after them. You stay here and search this house carefully. Don't let go of the underground too. See if the bell of soul convening is hidden here. Remember, do not miss anything. Min Chong hurriedly agreed and said, Grand Martial Uncle, I will definitely search carefully. The middle-aged Taoist nodded, waved his sleeves, and left in a flash of green light. At this time, the Qin couple were just now halfway to the Baofeng Monastery. They were still a dozen or so li away from the Baofeng Monastery, but the rain was getting heavier and the road ahead was getting more and more muddy. The mule cart was also having a hard time moving forward. At this time, Zhang Pan seemed to be a little uneasy. He was originally a spirit of the sea, and in this humid weather, he was especially sensitive to approaching danger. He glanced at the sky, took out a talisman, and muttered an incantation. Following the method taught by Zhang Yan, he threw the talisman into the sky. The talisman made a circle in the air and then fell in the northwest direction. It actually spontaneously combusted in this heavy rain and turned into a pile of ashes. His expression couldn't help but change. Not good, this is an ominous sign. Someone powerful is chasing us. When the Qin couple heard this, they were both frightened. Without hesitation, Zhang Pan took out 2 talisman with golden patterns from his sleeve and walked in front of the couple in 2 steps, saying, "This is the flying cloud talisman, passed down by Master. It can help the 2 of you to travel 100 miles away. When the talisman is activated, you must not open your eyes, or else you will fall from the clouds and die a horrible death." These words made Qin Jishi's face pale, and he was about to refuse, but the situation was critical, so Zhang Pan didn't want to waste time talking to them. He picked up the talisman and slapped it on the couple's body. There was a flash of golden light, and 2 figures flew up to the clouds, disappearing in a flash. However, when the 2 of them left, the maidservant Xiao was left behind. Terrified, she pulled on Zhang Pan's sleeve and said with a sobbing tone, "Little Taoist, what about this maidservant?" Previously, Zhang Yan only gave Zhang Pan 2 talismans, and he didn't have any more. Zhang Pan looked at Xiao's delicate and pitiful appearance. Although her pretty face was stained with tears, it couldn't hide her beauty. For some reason his heart palpitated, and he took out a pill and gave it to her, saying, "This pill can warm your body and get rid of the cold. You can go hide in the forest for the time being. The person chasing after you is your master, why would he care about you? When the rain stops, you can go to Baofeng Monastery to look for them." When Xiao heard this, she felt that it made sense, so she took the pill and ate it. She thanked Zhang Pan, picked up the hem of her dress, and hurriedly ran towards the forest not far away. Zhang Pan stood on the spot and looked up at the sky. Although this flying cloud talisman could carry a person and escape, its speed wasn't fast. If the person's cultivation was high, once he gave chase, there was a high chance that he could catch up. Therefore, with just these 2 talismans, they wouldn't be able to save him, so he had to go and stop him. As for whether he could stop this person, he had some confidence. After the battle at the East Sea, Zhang Yan's cultivation had improved again, and he could come and go as he pleased just by controlling the sword pellet. Many of the talismans in the past were no longer of much use to him, and since he didn't have any disciples by his side, he gave some to Zhang Yan to protect himself. Other than that, there were also a few talismans given to Zhang Yan by a few disciples of the Demon Kings to curry favor with him. His wealth was so rich that it was astounding. After waiting for a few breaths, he saw a ray of clear light flying over from the sky. He reached into his sleeve and took out a jade token. This jade tablet was called the Immortal Bird Jade Talisman, and it was a gift that Yan Xie of the Blue Feather Pavilion gave to Zhang Yan as an apology to her little brother. This jade talisman had a crane spirit soul, and if it was used properly, its power wouldn't be weaker than a cultivator at the 3rd level of the mystic light realm. Zhang Pan immediately slapped the talisman, and he heard a crane cry. A white light flashed in front of his eyes, and a white crane flapped its wings and flew towards the person. The middle-aged Taoist had already seen the figures of the Qin couple from afar, and when he saw that they used the talisman to escape, he became anxious. Just as he was about to chase after them, he suddenly saw a white ray shooting into the sky and heading towards him. He was also shocked, and he quickly turned around. He shook his sleeve, and a green profound light flew out, blocking the white ray. He took a closer look, and just now, he could see that it was an illusory spirit soul of a spirit crane. The surging spirit energy on this spirit made him frown, and he didn't dare to underestimate it anymore. He focused his mind to deal with it. However, after fighting for a few rounds, he slowly realized that the crane spirit's movements were slow and stiff, and it didn't match the abundant spirit energy on its body. He couldn't help but think that it was just Essos. Although this crane spirit's strength wasn't weaker than a cultivator at the third level of the mystic light realm, it still needed the person holding the talisman to control it. However, this Zhang Pan was just a little monster that hadn't transformed for a long time, and he usually relied on his monster cultivation to bully others. His own cultivation level wasn't that high, so he was extremely clumsy when fighting. The middle-aged Taoist waved his sleeve and pushed the spirit crane to the side. He said in the air, "Little Taoist boy, I, Shi Yangzi, came today because of the lost treasure of our sect. You and I are both cultivators. Why do we have to go against each other for two mortals? If you take a step back today, I won't make things difficult for you, and I'll let you go." How could Zhang Pan believe him? Although he didn't know about the soul-gathering bell, from what he could see, this person was obviously on the same side as Taoist Ma. He killed Taoist Ma, so there was no reason for him to let it go. Therefore, he didn't say anything and only focused on activating the talisman. Shi Yangzi shouted a few times, but Zhang Pan still didn't respond. He was annoyed and said, "Do you really think I'm afraid of you?" He snorted and waved his sleeve to force the spirit crane back. He then leaped to the side and pointed his finger downwards, and a green profound light flew towards Zhang Pan. Zhang Pan was shocked and quickly rolled on the ground and awkwardly avoided the profound light. Shi Yangzi sneered and raised the oil paper umbrella in his hand into the air. With a spell, the umbrella opened up. In an instant, a gust of black wind blew within the umbrella. The spirit crane lost its master's control and became dumb and didn't know how to dodge. It was swept up by the black wind and was sucked into the umbrella. When Zhang Pan got up, he saw this scene and couldn't help but be shocked. In a moment of desperation, he hurriedly shot a dozen black pearls at the umbrella. Shi Yangzi chuckled, and with a point of his hand, the umbrella spat out a gray mist and sucked all the pearls into it. Zhang Pan didn't give up and threw a 5-colored coral stone in the air. Shi Yangzi laughed and said, "Today, however many instruments you send, I'll take." He activated his magic power, and the treasured umbrella spun in the air. Suddenly, a white gas flashed out, and with a roll, the stone disappeared without a trace. In fact, although his words were beautiful, he was actually very surprised. One had to know that he was willing to put down his pride to deal with two mortals for a magic treasure, but this little boy had an endless supply of magic treasures and instruments, and no one knew if he had any powerful tricks up his sleeves. If he hadn't brought the 3 chi treasure covering umbrella with him today, he probably wouldn't have been able to do anything to the other party. Even the boy beside him could be this extravagant. One could imagine how difficult it was to deal with Lu Tianning. He couldn't help but secretly rejoice that he didn't act rashly earlier. At this moment, Zhang Pan was in a dilemma. He reached into his sleeve and took out a black ink stone and said to himself, "Treasure, whether or not I can keep my life today depends on you." He shouted and threw the ink stone into the air. In a split second, the object expanded to 50 feet in size and smashed down on Shi Yangzi's head. Seeing this object, Shi Yangzi's eyes lit up and he shouted, "Good treasure." For a moment, greed rose in his heart and he thought, "No matter who you are, I'll kill you here today. After obtaining this treasure, even if I lose the soul-gathering bell, it'll be worth it. Even if Lu Tianning comes back in the future, how would he know who did it?" Thinking of this, he shook his shoulder, and a green light appeared on top of his head. In a flash, it grew to 10 feet in size, and like a green leaf, it held the ink stone in place, preventing it from falling. At the same time, killing intent rose in his eyes, and with a wave of his hand, a white light with cold air whizzed towards Zhang Pan. Zhang Pan saw that the white light was coming at him too fast, and he couldn't avoid it in time, so he panicked. But right at this moment, the fate-determining jade tablet that Zhang Yan bestowed to him flew up, and it actually blocked the white light for a moment, yet it was unable to injure him. Shi Yangzi's face twitched, and he snorted. With a point of his finger, the white light flew up again. Seeing that the dagger was about to fall again, Zhang Pan couldn't think of anything else, and stared at his opponent and shouted, "If you dare to hurt me, my master will not let you go." Shi Yangzi laughed and said, "Even if your master is here, I'd like to see what he can do to me." Just as his voice fell, a loud shout came from the sky. This shout was like a thunderclap. Before the person arrived, a wave of air rushed over. Shi Yangzi only felt a buzzing sound in his ears. His body swayed and he almost fell from the cloud. Target equals _blank. Chapter 220. Death by 3 hammer. Shi Yangzi's body only shook a little before he immediately woke up. Just from this shout, he could tell that this person's cultivation was definitely not below his own, and it might even be higher. Furthermore, it was very likely that this person was the elder of this Taoist child in front of him. If one came, it would be easy to deal with, but if 2 or 3 came, he definitely wouldn't be able to escape. Therefore, the safest choice for him right now was to temporarily hide. However, there was a trace of hesitation in his eyes before a trace of treachery and fierceness appeared in his eyes. His eyes sharpened as he let out a low roar. Not only did he not leave, but he even curled his finger. The white light spun in the air and charged towards Zhang Pan without a care for anything else, revealing an expression that seemed like it wouldn't stop until it killed him. However, at this moment, there was the sound of wind breaking. This whistling sound made one's eardrums vibrate as if they were about to be torn apart. A multicolored flying hammer flew over in time and collided with the white light. With the sound of metal colliding, the white light immediately shattered into 3 pieces and fell to the ground. Upon closer inspection, it was a cold iron dagger. Good. Seeing this, not only was Shi Yangzi not surprised, but a trace of joy appeared in his eyes as if his plan had succeeded. Taking this opportunity, he stretched out his hand and grabbed at the crane spirit jade talisman in Zhang Pan's hand. The latter didn't release it and was caught off guard. He only had time to let out a cry before the jade talisman was sucked away by Shi Yangzi. After Shi Yangzi took the jade talisman, he threw it into his sleeve and then opened the 3 chi covering earth umbrella in the air. With a shake, a wisp of black chi flew out from under the umbrella and collected the soul-suppressing inkstone. Then, with a roll of the profound light, he actually wrapped himself up and turned into light to escape without looking back. These actions were done extremely smoothly, and he finished them before Zhang Yan arrived. He was also very proud of his swift actions. It wasn't that he was afraid of Zhang Yan, but he felt that it wasn't easy for him to cultivate to this point. He still wanted to reach the Tao of immortality one day, so he treasured his life a lot. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he wouldn't easily fight with other cultivators of the mystic light realm. Therefore, after learning that the Chun couple might have been taken care of by Lu Tianying, he would rather endure it and not look for trouble. More importantly, he wasn't clear about Zhang Yan's background. He was truly afraid of Zhang Yan's method of using one transcendent artifact after another. If Zhang Yan were to do the same, how would he be able to defend himself? Even if he could defeat his opponent, who didn't have a fellow master. If they came to find trouble with him one after another, would he still be able to cultivate? Therefore, he would rather leave first than take the initiative to start a conflict with the other party. It would be best if he did not even meet the other party face to face, lest a conflict arise when they meet again in the future. He flew the entire way with the intention of keeping the peace. After traveling for several dozen miles, he turned around and saw a cloud of mist following closely behind him. He couldn't help but curse in his heart. However, when he looked carefully, although the other party's speed wasn't slow, it wasn't much faster than him. His heart made up, he touched the treasured umbrella and took out the treasured inkstone. He placed it in front of his eyes and revealed a pleased expression. He felt that this trip was worth it. At this moment, it didn't matter if the soul-gathering bell could catch up to him or not. He had just seen the power of the inkstone and it was definitely above the complete 6 god bell. It was just that it couldn't display its power in Zhang Pan's hands. Once he went back and refined this inkstone, it would be enough for him to try his luck at the Treasure Zoisha conference. Zhang Yan followed closely behind Shi Yangzi. His eyes stared forward with a hint of playfulness. This person had come to make things difficult for the Chun couple twice. Although he didn't know what his goal was, Madame Chun had a person who had a great karmic connection with him in her womb. He couldn't allow anything to happen to the child before it was born. He couldn't stay by the Chun couple's side to protect them at all times. Moreover, this person had taken his soul-suppressing inkstone, So in his eyes, he had become a person that had to be eliminated. However, he was now acting as a strength path cultivator and had never used strength path to fight an enemy alone. Originally, he wanted to find a cultivator to practice with. Now that this person had delivered himself to his door, it was exactly what he wanted. Therefore, he didn't use his sword to escape and continued to move forward on the cloud. If the other party didn't stop, he didn't mind following him. He wanted to see who would be the first to give up. After about an hour, Shi Yangzi looked back again and found that the other party's speed seemed to be a little faster than before. He couldn't help but be slightly surprised. He thought about it carefully and determined that it wasn't that the other party's speed had become faster. Instead, it was that he had unknowingly used up his spiritual qi. As a result, his speed was much slower than before. He thought to himself and said, "If this goes on, this person will catch up to me in at most 30 minutes. I need to prepare early." He opened his palm and revealed the crane spirit jade talisman that he had been holding tightly in his hand. He couldn't help but let out a low laugh. After such a long time of flying, he had already refined this talisman using his sex direct lineage mental cultivation method to make it his own. Although he rarely fought with cultivators, he was very good at the Tao of survival and avoiding disasters. He often watched other people fight and often thought about how he would deal with different situations. Therefore, his brain worked very fast. When Zhang Yan arrived earlier, he immediately thought of Zhang Pan's crane spirit jade talisman. Now that the crane spirit had been kept into the 3 Qis earthen umbrella, if he were to snatch the talisman, he would be able to use it to fight with his opponent later. Not only would he be able to test his opponent's strength, even if he really couldn't win, he would still have time to escape. At this moment, he stopped and kept the conveyance light. He opened the umbrella and released the spirit crane spirit essence. Then he held the talisman. Under the urging of his mana, the spirit crane spirit essence with white feathers and black tail let out a loud and clear cry. It flapped its wings and flew up. In a blink of an eye, its body doubled in size. It was almost 100 feet in size. In the clouds, a white bird was fluttering. It raised its beak and danced. Its feathers fluttered like a celestial spirit. Its red crown was like blood. Its cry cut through the blue clouds. There was light in its eyes. It no longer had the dull look it had when it was in Zhang Pan's hands. Shi Yangzi shook the talisman in his hand again. The spirit crane spirit essence turned one round and used its long red beak to peck Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan sneered in his heart. He didn't expect this person to use tricks. He used the talisman he gave to Zhang Pan to deal with him. However, he didn't care about a mere spirit crane. Not only did he not dodge, he rushed forward. With a loud shout, he raised the adamantine golden hammer in his hand and smashed it down. A muffled sound that sounded like a drum rang in the air. It was as if the hammer had smashed on the surface of water. White mist and ice beads scattered in all directions, creating layers of ripples on the body of the spirit crane. The transmogrified body of the spirit crane flickered, showing signs of collapsing under the hammer. The spirit crane spirit essence's beak also pierced into Zhang Yan's shoulder. It penetrated several inches deep and blood seeped out from under his clothes. However, he didn't seem to feel it. He let go of the golden hammer and grabbed the spirit crane spirit essence's neck with his other hand. He then raised the hand holding the hammer and smashed it down. This strike landed squarely on the head of the spirit crane. With a wail, it flapped its wings and kicked its legs in a disorderly manner, trying to struggle free. However, Zhang Yan's hand seemed to be made of iron and did not budge at all. He once again raised the mixed iron fierce golden hammer in his hand and suddenly let out a loud shout. Only a loud bang was heard and the spirit crane beneath him collapsed. Specks of spiritual light flew away, leaving only traces of clear qi lingering around the golden hammer and lingering in the air. The talisman in Shi Yangzi's hand shattered into powder and fell from his fingers. He was dumbfounded. The spirit crane spirit essence that was comparable to a cultivator at the 3rd level of the mystic light realm was destroyed just like that? He shuddered and didn't dare to stay for even a second longer. He hurriedly turned into a streak of light and escaped. Zhang Yan circulated his xian qi and the wound on his shoulder immediately disappeared. Seeing that Shi Yangzi wanted to escape, A hint of mockery flashed across his face. He formed a hand seal, and the golden hammer that he had just thrown away was already waiting in the air in front of him. It smashed down right at Shi Yangzi. Shi Yangzi only moved a few dozen feet before he felt that something was wrong. He raised his head and saw a golden hammer smashing toward him. He was instantly scared out of his wits and quickly twisted his body. He avoided the front, but the side of his back was lightly grazed, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. Zhang Yan's body turned into a breeze. However, the aura around him was fierce and fierce. The wind around him was like 1,000 horses galloping over. After a few rounds, Shi Yangzi could already tell that he was a cultivator that cultivated the strength path. How would he dare to let him get close? Shi Yangzi gathered all the Xian Qi in his body and revealed the profound light above his head. He then shook his body, and the profound light dots rained down on Zhang Yan like hailstones. Zhang Yan waved his hammers, and the profound light dots scattered like water splashing across the reef. He arrived in front of Shi Yangzi after a few steps and smashed the hammer down on his face. The profound light in front of him was scattered like a piece of paper. The remaining force didn't stop, and it landed on Shi Yangzi's shoulder. Crack! Shi Yangzi's shoulder bone shattered. He let out a miserable cry and his body bent down. Zhang Yan was fighting to his heart's content. The golden hammer in his other hand swept horizontally. Shi Yangzi was scared out of his wits. Hastily he used the 3 Qis covering earth umbrella to block, but it was like a rotten wood supporting a beam. It broke with a loud noise. The hammer fell on Shi Yangzi's abdomen, causing blood to gush out crazily. The mysterious light dissipated. Shi Yangzi could no longer stand and fell backward. Zhang Yan reached out and grabbed his collar, lifting him up and raising the hammer in his hand high again. Seeing that his life was at stake, Shi Yangzi coughed up a few mouthfuls of blood and said hatefully, "Wait, who are you? Can you tell me?" Zhang Yan glanced at him and laughed loudly. "Remember this, I am Li Yuanba." He roared and smashed the hammer down. Shi Yangzi's head exploded and he died on the spot. At the same time Shi Yangzi died, thousands of miles away, in a dilapidated Taoist temple hidden deep in the belly of a mountain, a statue that looked like a demon but not a demon, like a god but not a god, suddenly opened its eyes. The light in its eyes instantly illuminated the whole temple, and the mud powder on its eyelids fell down. He muttered, "Li Yuanba? Interesting, you destroyed one of my doppelgangers. Forget it, it's gone, I'll just replace it." The statue silently muttered a few words and then fell silent again. The brilliance that filled the whole Taoist temple also gradually dimmed. Target equals _blank. Chapter 221. Chapter 82. The Birth of the Demon Tortoise. In a dense forest, 2 escape lights flew through the air and landed on the ground. However, someone in the escape light exclaimed, and the light figure suddenly slowed down. Like a light feather, it slowly floated down, and then the light disappeared without a trace. Madame Chen and Qin Jisher looked at each other and saw the lingering fear in each other's eyes. Madame Chen patted her chest and looked around, saying, "Husband, this is the wilderness and there might be wild beasts around. We should leave quickly." She took a few steps and her hand was grabbed by Qin Jisher. She looked at him strangely. Qin Jisher stammered, "Wife, are you really going to give my son to Priest Zhang as his disciple?" Madame Chen frowned. "Husband, why are you saying all these things now? Running for our lives is more important." She shook off Qin Jisher's hand and walked out of the forest with her hands on her abdomen. Qin Jisher stomped his feet and chased after her. He went up to support Madame Chen. She struggled a little and let him go. The forest was not big, but when Madame Chen was about to leave the forest, she paused as if she thought of something and said, "Wait, I saw a shadow chasing behind us." Fortunately, the little Taoist blocked it. If we go out now, what if the little Taoist couldn't block it and that person chased after us? Qin Jisher hesitated. "The little priest's mana is strong, I'm afraid." Madame Chen shook her head. "If the little priest can block it, why let us go first? Sigh, if only Priest Zhang was here." Qin Jisher was speechless. Madame Chen looked at the sky and saw that the sun had risen. She immediately turned around and said, "Let's hide in the forest." Qin Jisher was shocked. There are tigers, wolves, jackals and leopards in the forest. Why do you need to take the risk? Madam Chen said coldly. Tigers, wolves, jackals and leopards, how can they be unpredictable? I'm not afraid. What is husband afraid of? Chen Jishir sighed and could only support his wife as they walked forward. But after walking a few steps, Madam Chen's face suddenly turned pale and cold sweat dripped down her forehead. She felt a pain in her waist and abdomen. She reached out her hand and felt something red between her legs. She thought, not good, could it be that my child is about to come out? With this thought, he could no longer endure the pain and couldn't help but let out a moan. Seeing his wife crying out in pain, Chen Jishir was momentarily at a loss of what to do. On the other hand, although Madam Chen was in pain, she was rather calm and ordered, "Husband, quickly remove the pot from your back. Go and gather some dry wood and fetch some water from the river to boil it." Chen Jishir made a series of "oh" noises. He was still grumbling about why his wife had given up on those books and insisted on bringing this pot with her, but now he admired his wife's foresight. He wasn't someone who didn't know how to differentiate between the 5 grains and the 4 limbs of his body. His family often farmed for a living, so it wasn't messy to take care of these things. When they reached the river, he took off his long gown and poured the water into the pot. He brought it over and in a short while, he started the fire and boiled the water. At this time, Madam Chen's pain was getting worse. He rubbed his hands nervously and paced around her, wishing that he could take her place. 2 hours had passed since Madam Chen was born, but the smell of blood had attracted many beasts in the forest. Chen Jishir heard a series of rustling sounds and could faintly see something wandering in the forest. His heart was filled with fear and he didn't care if it was useful or not. He made the fire burn brighter and felt at ease. He anxiously took care of Madam Chen for close to an hour before the child was finally born. As soon as the child was born, the umbilical cord fell off and his eyes opened. Normally when a child is born, they would cry. But when this child was born, he let out a giggle. The sound was loud and clear, piercing through the sky and splitting the clouds. It shocked the birds in the forest and caused them to fly away. Many of the beasts in the distance seemed to be frightened and ran away with their tails between their legs. Chen Jishir was bewildered and thought to himself, when other people's children come into this world, they cry. Why is my child laughing? But at this moment, he was still immersed in the joy of becoming a father for the first time. This thought flashed past his mind and he carried the child and washed off the blood stains on his body. He wrapped the child in a robe and placed it at the side. He then changed a towel and wiped Madam Chen's body. Although Madam Chen was weak, she anxiously said, "Husband, is it a boy or a girl? Quick, bring the child to me to see." Chen Jishir nodded his head and tore off a piece of his robe. He wrapped the child up and handed it to his wife. He warmly said, "Wife, it's a boy." Madam Chen struggled to stretch out her hand to take it. She looked at her child with an infinitely gentle gaze. From time to time, she would stretch out her fingers to tease him. However, she was also extremely tired. Not long after, she fell asleep with a smile on her face. Chen Jishir was also tired, but he finally calmed down and let out a long breath. But after sitting for a while, he suddenly thought of something and was shocked. He didn't tell Madam Chen about this. That day, he dreamt of a white-haired Taoist passing through the room. Later on, he found out that Madam Chen was pregnant and specially went to have her fortune read. The Taoist told him that if Madam Chen's first child was a daughter, then she would be guaranteed a lifetime of wealth and glory. But if she was a boy, then her parents would definitely die. He was originally skeptical about this, but with all the strange things happening before his eyes, he had no choice but to believe it. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. He thought, my family is a scholarly family. Although we can't be considered rich, we don't have to worry about food and clothing. I should be studying and taking exams right now, so why would I be involved in these strange things? This child must be a demon, and the root of the disaster for my family. Why don't I? As soon as he thought of this, he shakily stretched out his hands and picked up the child. He had the intention to throw this source of disaster to death. But when he picked it up, he saw that the child's face was rosy, unlike the wrinkled and ugly appearance of other children when they were born. Moreover, the child's eyes were bright and lively, the pupils were like dots of paint. Seeing that he was carrying her, not only was she not afraid, she even giggled and stretched out her pink hand to play with his beard. Seeing how cute this child was, Qin Jishir couldn't bear to do it. This was his own flesh and blood, so how could he bear to hurt him? On the other side of the forest, Zhang Pan was riding a magic tool in the shape of a flying cloud in search of the Qin couple. When he arrived, he suddenly smelled the scent of blood and couldn't help but be startled. Following the scent, he found his way over. Zhang Pan saw Qin Jishir raise his hands again and again, as if he wanted to throw the child to death. But the child thought that his father was just playing with him and was waving his arms and legs, giggling. Zhang Pan was shocked. Zhang Yan had told him that nothing could happen to this child, so he angrily roared, "Qin Sheng, what are you doing?" Qin Jishir's hands trembled and he almost dropped the child. Seeing that Zhang Pan was still standing in the air, he picked up the child and sat down on the ground. Disregarding the filth of his clothes, he scooted backwards. Then, as if he had come to a realization, he threatened, "Don't come over, or else I'll throw this child to death on the spot, and your master won't be able to be his master." Zhang Pan's eyes were filled with anger as he shouted, "Qin Jishir, even though I, Zhang Pan, am a beast, I know that even a vicious tiger will not eat its cubs. Why haven't you put down the child in your hands?" "Beast?" Qin Jishir was startled, then a look of realization appeared on his face. He said emotionally, as expected, I guessed correctly. You are all jackals of the same tribe. This child is a monster." Although he said this, his hands didn't move. Zhang Pan was afraid of hurting the child, so he didn't dare to rush forward. At the same time, a beautiful and dignified female Taoist with a fly whisk in her hand passed by in midair. She seemed to be looking for something. At this moment, she glanced down and her eyes were filled with joy as she said, "Wonderful, wonderful. So Martial Uncle's disciple is here." She pressed down on the cloud and saw Zhang Pan saying something in front of Qin Jishir. She hurriedly waved her fly whisk and shouted, "Where did you come from, monster? Hurry up and leave, or else don't blame I for being merciless." Naturally, she could tell that Zhang Pan was a demon in human form, but she rarely killed. She also saw that Zhang Pan was stepping on a magical tool and the spiritual energy on his body was righteous but not evil, so she guessed that he might be a disciple of some big sect. Therefore, she did not want to cause any trouble and only wanted to drive him away. Zhang Pan couldn't see the depth of this Taoist nun's cultivation. Now that he didn't have any talismans on him, he knew he wasn't this person's match. He thought to himself, this Kuandao's cultivation is high, and she seems to be from a righteous sect. She probably won't allow Qin Jishir to kill in front of her. I'll remember her appearance first, then I'll deal with her after I call master. He then bowed to the Taoist nun and said, "This Taoist priest, I'll leave now." He glared at Qin Jishir fiercely and drove his instrument into the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye. The Taoist nun leisurely walked to Qin Jishir. The latter sighed and stood up to bow, saying, "Qin Jishir thanks Taoist priest for saving me." The Taoist nun smiled faintly and said, "You're called Qin Jishir? You don't have to be so polite. I came here for a matter today, saving you was just a matter of convenience. Speaking of which, this matter is also related to you." Qin Jishir was puzzled and asked, "May I ask Taoist priest, what is it?" The Taoist nun glanced at the child in his arms, then looked back at him and said with a smile, "I came to accept a disciple." Hearing this, Qin Jishir felt as if he was struck by lightning. He couldn't stand still and took 2 steps back as if he had given up. He let out a long sigh and said, "Forget it, it's not up to me anyway. You can take this child." With both hands, he held the child in front of the Taoist nun. The Taoist nun glanced at the child and said, "What do I want this child for?" Qin Jishir was stunned and said, "Taoist priest, aren't you here to accept a disciple?" The Taoist nun shook her head and said, "No, it's not I who's here to accept a disciple, it's I who's here to accept a disciple on behalf of my uncle master." Qin Jishir smiled bitterly and said, "Isn't that the same thing? In short, you have to take this child away." The Taoist nun frowned and looked at the child again. She cupped her hands and said, "Layman Chin, it's not that I don't want to accept this child, but I see that this child is outstanding and has a strange phenomenon. I'm afraid his background is great and not something that I can accept. I hope Layman can forgive me." Qin Jishur was confused and said, "If Taoist priest doesn't want to accept my child as a disciple, then who are you here to accept as a disciple?" The Taoist nun smiled and cupped her hands and said, "Of course I'm here for Layman. Layman and my Sherbois are connected by karma, so I should call you Shixiang. Now that the time has come, it's time to return to the mountain." She didn't avoid it and went up to grab Qin Jishur and said in a deep voice, "Shixiang, come with I back to the mountain today." Hearing this, Qin Jishur's mouth opened wide and his face was full of disbelief. Seeing that the Taoist nun was going to pull him away, he hurriedly struggled and shouted, "Wait, my wife." The Taoist priestess turned her head and smiled, saying, "In the future, when Shixiang has the ability to fly in the sky and burrow into the earth, you will be able to come back and visit Madam. Time waits for no man, Shixiang should leave with I." With a wave of her horsetail whisk, the child in Qin Jishur's hand was carried by a gentle force to the side of Madame Chen. Then, with a shake of her sleeve, a puff of smoke rose from the ground, and the two of them broke through the sky and disappeared into the clouds. Hashtag, you can see or target equals _blank. Chapter 222. The third level of the mystic light realm, 60 years without lapsing inside the Baofeng temple, Zhang Yan sat on the cloud couch. His eyes were closed and his breathing was slow and slow. He was so quiet that he forgot about everything else. Gradually, a wisp of mist emerged from the top of his head. It rose like smoke and rushed straight to the roof beams. In the end, it gathered into a ball. Within the mist, there was a flickering flame that emitted a crackling sound. It was as if lightning had struck a copper pillar. Sparks flickered and specks of golden flowers shot out, fluttering and scattering down. The golden flowers that seemed to be made of light didn't scatter after they landed on the cloud couch. Their petals glowed brightly like the stars in the sky, and the candles in the night were like mirrors, illuminating the surroundings. Zhang Yan's eyes were still closed and he didn't move. His expression was calm, and there was a faint smile on his lips. It was as if he was blessed and happy, and he had forgotten about his worries. After an unknown amount of time, he slowly opened his eyes and shouted. The petals of the flowers on the couch flew toward the dozens of extinguished candles in front of him. Each petal was like a golden flower, and they accurately flew into the candles. The flames on the candles suddenly shot up, and it was as if thousands of torches were lighting up the night sky. The entire temple was filled with light. Seeing this, Zhang Yan smiled faintly and stood up from the couch. He opened his sleeves and chanted, "The fireflies dance lightly, the stars go to the heart, the river illuminates the night fire, and the candle lights 10,000 miles away." After 10 years of tempering, his cultivation had naturally reached the third level of the profound light realm, the realm of profound light penetration. At this point, there wasn't a huge commotion like when he broke through the first two levels. This was because he had returned to his original state. Every ray of mystic light that split off from his body was as condensed as one. If it was in the hands of a cultivator with light energy, it would become a sort of energy that was both hard and soft. Moreover, when one reached this realm, there was a saying among cultivators. It was called 60 years of not losing. It was said that a scholar once met a Taoist when he was hiding from the rain in the mountains. The two of them played a few games of chess, but the Taoist lost 3 games in a row. In the end, he lost a wooden box to the scholar, which was said to be able to suppress all evil beings. The scholar was a disciple of the sage and had never taken this matter to heart. Thus, he threw the box in the storage room. Occasionally, he would think of it, but he would only talk about it as an anecdote. Until one day, when his great-grandson was getting married, there was an evil wind blowing. The guests and servants were unable to light the candles and lanterns. The scholar did not know why, but he suddenly thought of this wooden box. He quickly took it out and opened it. From the wooden box came a ray of light. In a split second the hall was illuminated from inside out. Everything was visible. It was as if he was standing under the scorching sun. At this moment, It had already been 60 years since the Taoist priest had given him this wooden box. The mysterious light was hidden deep within the box and was not damaged in the slightest. Zhang Yan knew that at this stage, if he were to continue cultivating, it would be nothing more than accumulating and slowly refining, condensing a mouthful of true fire from the mystic light. This fire was called the flame in the light. It was also called the yang in the orifice. It was a breath of pure yang qi that was formed when the mysterious light essence of the entire body was cultivated to the extreme. This first breath of yang qi was the most condensed. It could be said to be flawless. When cultivators condensed their dan, they needed to rely on this fire to purify the golden dan, removing the impurities and retaining the essence. It was the firewood for condensing the dan. It needed to be carefully stored and guarded. It could not be extinguished. The reason why when a small golden dan cultivator condensed the dan again, the quality of the dan was far from what it used to be, it was because they needed to condense this fire again, but the essence was not pure. At this moment, when Zhang Yan reached this stage, he felt the essence in his body become active, swelling up and wanting to burst out. He knew that this essence must not be released, otherwise the breath of yang fire that was formed in the future would not be pure. So he took a step out of Baofeng Monastery and went straight into the clouds. He sat down on top of the cloud and silently circulated his technique, calming the fire in his heart. Not long after, his mind became calm and he calmed down. Unknowingly, 4 hours passed like this. He suddenly woke up and saw that the sky was slightly white. He felt refreshed and his body was light. He laughed and pressed down on the cloud, returning to the monastery. When he returned to the hall, he saw that Zhang Pan was already waiting there. He went up and bowed, "Master." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "Zhang Pan, have you settled everything?" Zhang Pan hurriedly said, "Don't worry, Master. I have already settled the mother and son of Lady Qin." Zhang Yan didn't expect that Qin Jisher would be taken in as a disciple by someone, although he didn't know who it was still a reminder. This child who was born must have had many enemies in his previous life. He was still a mortal now, although he must have made some preparations when he reincarnated. If someone who was proficient in Xian Shu gave up their cultivation to calculate, it was hard to guarantee that nothing would go wrong. Originally, Zhang Yan wanted to take the mother and son to his side to take care of them, but this Baofeng monastery didn't allow female guests to stay, and he couldn't always take care of them. Later on he thought of a way. There was a river near this Baofeng monastery. It was called Tangxing River, so Zhang Yan first used the tri-elements mixed water banner to split the waves, and when he reached the depths of the water, he used the mysterious light to open up a cave, and finally set up the Zhu Yuan Ing Xing 3 Qi Palace guarding formation. With the protection of this formation flag, it could gather the vigorous and thick qi of heaven and earth to defend against external enemies. And even if spiritual master Yuaning came, it would be able to resist for a while. Zhang Yan left enough pills and clean water for the mother and son in this cave, and he also gave them the talisman to protect him when he came to East Flower Continent. This way, there would be no more doubts. When he went to the treasure auction, even if someone came to attack the cave, he would still have time to activate the talisman and temporarily hide in the overseas Pure Feather sect. Zhang Yan said again, "The day before yesterday, Dao brother Gongsun sent a letter, saying that he will be bringing a few Dao friends to visit today. Go clean up the main hall, then go take care of the disciples in the monastery, and tell them to go back to their rooms to chant. If they see anything strange, don't make a sound, understood?" Zhang Pan said, "I will follow your orders, master." At this moment, dozens of miles away, there were 5 cultivators, 4 men and 1 woman, riding a flying boat towards Baofeng Monastery. One of them was Gongsun Mian. And standing at the very front was a cultivator with high cheekbones, a plump nose, thick eyebrows, and thick lips. However, at this moment, there was anger on his face as he said, "That Wu clan is so angry, they only gave me a copper bamboo talisman and sent me away. The last time my martial uncle went, they even gave me a silver talisman. I've wasted these few years running around and doing so many things for them." Beside him, a cultivator with a long and narrow face smiled, patted his shoulder, and comforted him. "Senior brother Cheng, why do you have to be so aggrieved? You should know that those kinds of big Taoist clans don't care about cultivators from small sects like us. Now that we were able to obtain a talisman, it's already not bad. Thinking too much will only cause trouble. Senior brother Cheng rolled his eyes and said grumpily, Senior brother, he is quite open-minded and has a good temper. But this talisman of yours is easy to obtain, but you don't know how difficult it was for me. Senior brother, he saw that senior brother Cheng's anger couldn't be quelled, and he was afraid that they would end up in a deadlock if they continued talking, so he laughed and changed the topic. He turned to Gong Sun Mian and said, according to what I know, fellow Taoist Gongsuan's copper bamboo talisman was also not easy to obtain, but you're willing to introduce that fellow Taoist Li. I believe that person must be outstanding in some aspects? Before Gong Sun Mian could speak, the only female cultivator on the flying boat smiled and said bluntly, I still don't know fellow Taoist Gongsuan's temper. He must be someone who wants to save face, saying that this fellow Taoist Li is outstanding. When we meet, I want to see if he's just boasting. When this female cultivator smiled, her eyes curved, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. Although he knew that she was joking, Gong Sun Mian was still unconvinced and said, Junior Sister Ku, why do you say that? You guys haven't seen this fellow Taoist Li before, so you don't know how outstanding he is. That day when Yu Hongzhang saw him, he immediately sent an invitation, inviting him to the Nine-Dragon Lake for a banquet. It can be seen that he's outstanding. The people who were traveling with them revealed expressions of surprise. Although this Yu Hongzhang didn't look like a cultivator to them, this person had a wide circle of friends, and his judgment of people wasn't bad. If this Li Yuanba was valued by him, then he really wasn't simple. A glimmer of light appeared in senior brother He's eyes, and he said with a happy expression, if that's really the case, then during the Treasure Zoisha conference, we'll have a bit more confidence. The cultivators participating in the Treasure Zoisha conference were also divided into various ranks. Most of the disciples of the aristocratic families had the golden bamboo token given by the Tai Hao sect. Not only could they bring their servants and strong men into the association, they could even choose a few cultivators from the clan to follow them. In this way, the possibility of them obtaining a good one-chi Ganoderma would greatly increase. As for cultivators like senior brother He and senior brother Cheng, they could only band together to fight against the disciples of the large clans, so that they wouldn't have to return empty-handed. However, at this time, a lazy voice rang out, saying, he's just a rogue cultivator. If he really had the ability, why would he need fellow Taoist Gongsuan's recommendation? He even took the copper bamboo token. With that Yu Hongzhang's ability, he should be able to find a silver token, right? When this voice came out, Gong Sun Mian frowned and glanced at this person, but he didn't say anything. When the other three heard this, they also didn't say anything. Some of them felt that this was somewhat reasonable. The person who spoke was called Chu Xiaohong, and he was a disciple of the Anqiu sect. If one didn't mention the 10 sects of the celestial sect, the Anqiu sect could be considered a large sect. Therefore, in this group of people, he always looked at others with a superior gaze. Although he wasn't likable, first of all, his cultivation was the highest among these people, and second of all, he was friends with many disciples of the Taihao school. It could be said that he had the widest connections, and the few people present still needed to rely on him, so they could only endure his arrogance. Chu Xiaohong and Gong Sun Mian could be considered to be familiar with each other. When he heard that the latter was praising Zhang Yan, he didn't think much of it at first. However, when he heard that Yu Hongzhang actually invited this person to the Nine-Dragon Lake banquet, he somehow felt a little angry in his heart. One had to know that there were many true disciples of the Taihao school at the Nine-Dragon Lake banquet. If he could make friends with one or two, it would be very beneficial to him. Even if he couldn't obtain the one-chi Zoisha, it would be worth it. He had thought of many ways to express his goodwill to Yu Hongzhang, but the other party was polite to him on the surface, but in reality he didn't care about him at all. Chu Xiaohong couldn't help but think in his heart, to think that I have cultivated bitterly for dozens of years, and my cultivation is not weaker than that of the ordinary disciples of the Taihao school, but I can't go to the Nine-Dragon Lake banquet. What ability does this Li Yuanba have that Yu Hongzhang thinks highly of him? When I see him, I'll definitely embarrass him. Target equals _blank. Chapter 223. Picking a fight at a banquet. As the sun gradually rose, Gong Sun Mian's group of 5 arrived at Jurong Mountain on a flying boat. Looking around, the main hall of Baofeng Temple sat at the top of the mountain, quiet and secluded. Ancient trees grew in front of the temple, and the sounds of birds chirping and running water could be heard clearly in the forest. Chu Xiaohong saw that there was no trace of anyone below, so he looked at Gong Sun Mian and sneered, "Taoist brother Gong Sun, it seems like this Taoist Li doesn't care about us at all. He still doesn't know that we're coming. Why isn't there anyone to welcome us?" Gong Sun Mian invited these people this time with the intention of befriending Zhang Yan. In his opinion, it was better to have a few people helping each other at the treasure auction than to fight alone. If Zhang Yan appreciated this favor, with his boldness of casually giving away spiritual herbs, he would definitely not mistreat him. Coincidentally, he had dealings with these people, so he took the initiative to invite them and introduce them to Zhang Yan. However, Chu Xiaohong didn't know his true intentions. He only thought that Zhang Yan invited Gong Sun Mian to invite them to a banquet because he wanted to join their circle and be taken care of at the treasure auction. Among these people, he was faintly the leader, so his mentality was naturally a level higher than others. When he first heard that Zhang Yan was highly regarded by Yu Hongzhang, he was already filled with jealousy and hatred. Now that he was receiving such a cold reception, he was even more displeased. He was thinking about how to put on a show of strength to Zhang Yan later. Gong Sun Mian shook his head and said, "Senior brother Chu, you and I are both secular cultivators. Why do we need to care about this kind of mortal etiquette? There are many secular cultivators in this Baofeng temple. Us flying here is a shocking act, so it's reasonable that Taoist Li doesn't want to make a big fuss." Senior brother, he chuckled and also said, Exactly. Isn't Taoist Li a wandering cultivator? You're also staying in a senior brother's temple, so it's not good to be too ostentatious. A disciple of a large sect like senior brother Chu will always be accompanied by servants, so why is there a need to be so harsh? Junior sister Ku, don't you agree? He turned his head to ask the female cultivator this last sentence. The female cultivator looked at Gong Sun Mian and then looked at Chu Xiaohong. She faintly smiled and said, "Senior martial brother, he is correct." Chu Xiaohong gave a laugh and didn't bother with this anymore. He saw that there was an empty space in front of the main hall, so he waved the talisman in his hand and the flying boat descended. At this time, the sound of footsteps could be heard. Zhang Pan walked out from the hall and greeted the 5 guests. "Honored guests, my master has been waiting for you for a long time." Chu Xiaohong saw that he was ugly and was even a monster in human form, so he felt disdain in his heart. He thought to himself, who knows where this wild person came from, actually using a monster as a servant. Other people choose spirit beasts and celestial birds, but you chose a monster of unknown origin. With a servant like this, the master can't be any better. Thinking of this, he became even more impolite and scolded, "You little boy, we have come from afar. How can your master neglect us like this? How can he not come out to greet us personally?" Zhang Pan was startled. Gong Sun Mian saw that something was wrong. He didn't come to offend Zhang Yan today, so he quickly walked forward and coughed, saying, "Little boy, please lead the way." Zhang Pan didn't think much and didn't know much about the ways of the world, so he didn't notice anything strange. After bowing, he moved to the side and gestured with his hand, saying, "Honored guests, please." Gong Sun Mian glanced at Chu Xiaohong with a reproachful look in his eyes, then he walked into the hall. The other 3 looked at each other and followed. Chu Xiaohong ignored Gong Sun Mian's gaze. He was confident that he was on good terms with the disciples of Taihao School, so he didn't need to give Gong Sun Mian face. Therefore, he snorted and waved his sleeve, stepping inside. When the 5 of them arrived at the hall, they looked up and saw a tall and imposing figure standing in the main hall. He was like a towering mountain, towering and lonely. Seeing them enter, he smiled and cupped his hands, saying, "Fellow Taoists, I apologize for not going out to meet you." Other than Chu Xiaohong, the others saw that he was heroic and extraordinary, and his aura was as deep as the ocean, so they didn't dare to underestimate him. They all bowed in return. Gong Sun Mian stood up straight and smiled, saying, Come, brother Li, let me introduce you to these fellow Taoists." He pulled everyone over and told them about their backgrounds. Senior brother Cheng's name was Cheng Hao. He came from Changshan sect and was a wandering cultivator. As for senior brother he had some background. He was called He Rinxian. He came from Wujin Cave of Mount Sevenli. The previous cave master was originally a disciple of Nanhua sect. As for the female cultivator, she was called Ku Xiujuan. Other than Chu Xiaohong, she had the biggest background among the three. Her mother was a disciple of Prengyuan sect, and her father was a disciple of Wuyan Mountain's Jingyuan Immortal Mansion. Her Dao techniques were all passed down from her family. The few of them modestly offered their seats. In the end, Chu Xiaohong and Gong Sun Mian sat on the left and right side of the table, while the others chose a seat on each side of the table. Zhang Yan smiled and raised the bronze wine goblet, saying, "Come, everyone is a guest from afar, let me first offer a toast to everyone." At first, Gong Sun Mian had written a letter saying that he wanted to introduce a few fellow Taoists to him, but he didn't care. Later on, he thought that everyone who entered the treasure meet would try to find a way to help each other, so it would be too conspicuous for him to be alone. Furthermore, this was Gong Sun Mian's good intentions, so it wasn't good for him to refuse. That was why he was willing to get to know these people. However, he only had the intention to use them. On the surface, he seemed polite, but in reality he didn't really care about these people. After Chu Xiaohong sat down, he looked around and suddenly saw the row of empty lamps. His heart moved and he said loudly, "Brother Li, although your hall is spacious, it's too dark. Why don't I help you brighten it up?" He clapped his hand and a spark flew out from his palm. It split into dozens of dots of light that landed on the row of lamps in the hall. In an instant, dozens of scarlet-red rays of light soared up from the hall. These rays of light were like frozen fire beads of paste, gathering and not dispersing, releasing rays of fiery brilliance in the air. Chu Xiaohong had a smug look on his face as he glanced at Zhang Yan and said, "Junior brother Li, does this look good to your eyes?" He then reached out and pointed at the row of lamps that he had left behind and said, "This brother is the guest, and junior brother is the host. Junior brother Li, please take care of this row." Everyone here was at the mystic light realm, but due to the difference in their cultivation, the mystic light they cultivated wasn't as dense and refined as Chu Xiaohong's. Furthermore, at this moment, showing off like this wasn't the way a guest should act. Seeing this, Gong Sun Mian became even more annoyed and slammed the wine cup in his hand onto the table. He was about to speak when Chu Xiaohong acted like he suddenly understood and patted his forehead. "Aya, it's senior brother's fault. Just now, I remember that brother Li is a strength Dao cultivator. It seems I've made things difficult for you." The essence of a strength Dao cultivator was used to nourish themselves, so they obviously couldn't release mystic light like Qi Dao cultivators. Chu Xiaohong also knew about this beforehand, so he wanted to make things difficult for Zhang Yan first. Zhang Yan looked at him and smiled. "The sun is about to rise, and it's time for us to bask in the sunlight and enjoy the blessing of the heavens. If we light up the lamps now, wouldn't it be reversing yin and yang and messing up the heaven and earth? In my opinion, let's just forget about it." Chu Xiaohong felt smug. Just when he thought that Zhang Yan had lost, he saw Zhang Yan wave his sleeve and a gust of wind blew. All the mystic light on the lamps in the hall was extinguished at the same time. Everyone in the hall was startled. Then they looked at Zhang Yan, their eyes filled with fear. Cheng Hao's mouth was slightly open as he stared at Zhang Yan with wide eyes. He Rinxian was secretly shocked, and thought to himself, "This Li Yunba is indeed powerful. Senior brother Chu's mysterious light has already been condensed into one, and can be used as a magical item. This person only used a wisp of his aura to scatter this mysterious light. If I were to fight this person head-on, what kind of power would my fist have?" Ku Xiujuan's bright eyes also stared at Zhang Yan. No one knew what she was thinking, but a strange light flashed through her eyes. Chu Xiaohong's expression instantly became extremely ugly. He Renxian saw that the atmosphere was not right, so he quickly coughed and called out, Come, everyone, let's drink, let's drink." With him raising his head, the others also raised their cups. Only when the wine entered their stomachs, they felt that it was sweet and cool, cold and warm at the same time, heating up their acupoints. That Cheng Hao was a good drinker, so he couldn't help but exclaim, "Good wine! Sweet Dew Immortal Brew is nothing more than this." This wine was originally a gift from a demon king in the Clear Feather sect. Zhang Yan himself was not a glutton, so he took it out today to receive them. Chu Xiaohong brought the wine to his lips, but he only tasted it and did not drink it. Instead he gave a sigh and said, "Speaking of good wine, when I went to the Wu family last time, I was fortunate enough to drink a bottle of chilling pine crane. That is truly good wine." Cheng Hao's eyes lit up and he impatiently said, "Oh, come, senior brother Chu, tell me, what's so good about this wine?" When Chu Xiaohong heard this, he smiled and began to explain the various advantages of this chilling pine crane wine. Cheng Hao listened as if he was drunk. In the end, Chu Xiaohong even shook his head and sighed. He slowly poured the wine in his cup onto the ground and said, "Ever since I drank this wine, all other wines tasted like vinegar. It's fine if I don't drink it, it's fine if I don't drink it." At this moment, Cheng Hao finally realized that something was wrong. He looked at Zhang Yan, laughed dryly, and didn't say anything. The other 3 people frowned. This was clearly a deliberate provocation. They all thought, "I wonder what's wrong with this Chu Xiaohong. Why is he always going against this fellow Li?" Chu Xiaohong was not being hot-headed. He was already used to being flattered by others. It was like he was the moon surrounded by stars. Moreover, he had already made a plan for this treasure auction. If Zhang Yan's cultivation was weaker than his, he would be able to deal with him. However, Zhang Yan's cultivation was not weak. If he entered their circle, would these people listen to him or Zhang Yan? He could not help but feel threatened. Therefore, he could not accept Zhang Yan no matter what. The most direct and appropriate method was to have a battle between the two of them. Although the other party had just extinguished his profound light with a raise of his hand, it was a completely different matter if they were to truly fight. He was naturally confident that he would win. He did not believe that after he taught Zhang Yan a lesson in front of everyone, he would still have the face to walk with them. At worst, he would just be ruthless and cripple him. Would Gong Sun Mian still stand up for this person? Chu Xiaohong looked at Zhang Yan and said, "Speaking of which, I still don't know which sect fellow Li comes from. Who is your master?" Zhang Yan said without any trace of politeness, "My sect has no relationship with fellow Chu, there is no need for you to ask." Chu Xiaohong laughed coldly. Could it be that fellow Li has something difficult to say? His eyes flashed as he shouted, "You are a demonic cultivator." The moment these words were said, the expressions of the other 4 people changed. Zhang Yan sat in the hall and looked down. He said with a cold smile, "Brother Chu must have drunk too much. It looks like you need to sober up." Chu Xiaohong laughed loudly and said, "What if I don't want to?" #target=_. Chapter 224. After Chu Xiaohong said this, the atmosphere in the main hall changed. Gong Sun Mian never thought that the two of them would suddenly go against each other. Just as he was about to speak, he heard Zhang Yan laugh and throw the wine cup in his hand to the ground with a pa sound. He shouted, "Chu Xiaohong, I won't make things difficult for you on account of fellow Gong Sun Mian. You can scram." Chu Xiaohong was enraged hearing this. He kicked over the table in front of him and suddenly stood up. He pointed at Zhang Yan and scolded, "Liuanba, don't be so arrogant. Do you think that I, Chu Xiaohong, am easy to bully? Do you dare to come down and fight with me?" Seeing his fierce and impatient appearance, Zhang Yan looked at him for a few times before laughing towards the sky. Chu Xiaohong did not know why his heart felt weak from his laughter. He shouted again, "What are you laughing at? Could it be that you don't dare to accept my challenge?" Zhang Yan stared at his eyes and said with a faint smile, "Chu Xiaohong, if you can survive 3 of my palms, I'll let you go today." These words were said calmly, but they were filled with killing intent. It was as cold as frost, piercing his heart. Chu Xiaohong felt as if he was being stared at by a beast when Zhang Yan's sharp gaze swept over him. All the hairs on his body stood up and his muscles tensed up. The other 4 people saw that something was wrong and wanted to stop him. However, at this moment, Zhang Yan shouted and stood up, taking a step forward. As his foot landed on the ground, the bricks under his feet shattered and the entire hall shook. He then raised his hand and there was a chi-la sound. Because his action was too fierce, even his sleeves could not withstand it and were torn. He raised his hand and slapped towards Chu Xiaohong's head. Before his palm even reached him, a wave of air had already made it hard for him to breathe. Although Chu Xiaohong had never fought with a strength path cultivator before, he knew that he could not let him get close to him. However, he had taken the initiative to provoke him today, and there were other people watching in the main hall, so how could he retreat? However, he dared to stand out because he had something to rely on. Just as Zhang Yan's palm was about to land, a smooth jade bead appeared in his hand. He held the bead in his hand and chanted the incantation. In an instant, a golden light flew out from the jade bead and circled around him, covering his entire body. Once this treasure appeared, Chu Xiaohong's courage soared. The shocking aura Zhang Yan gave off when he arrived was also shocking. He almost couldn't help wanting to fly away. At this moment, Zhang Yan had already arrived in front of him. His palm descended and struck the golden light. With a dang sound, it was as if it had struck a copper bell, creating a deafening sound. The other 4 people in the hall all felt their chests tighten and they wanted to vomit. Under this strike, the golden light actually shook and showed signs of collapsing. Chu Xiaohong was also shocked. He was intimidated by Zhang Yan's aura and could not think of counterattacking. He quickly chanted the incantation and tried his best to stabilize the golden light. His treasure was called Ding Kuan Zi, and it was a protective treasure. There were 7 of them refined in the bead door, and if all 7 of them were present, their uses would be limitless. However, he only had 1 of them, but normally, even if there were magical treasures attacking him, he would rely on this treasure to remain unharmed, and had never been broken by anyone. Who would have thought that under this palm strike just now, it would actually be almost shattered by Li Yuanba? His heart was also palpitating. This was still Zhang Yan fighting him empty-handed. If the other party used the divine weapon in his hand, would he still be alive? With this thought, Chu Xiaohong activated all the Fa Li in his body and the protective golden light suddenly released an even more dazzling light than before. However, Zhang Yan's face was expressionless. He slightly drew out a bit of the profound qi from the gold core in his stomach. With a kacha sound, his palm swelled up as if it was inflated and he slapped towards the golden light again. When the palm collided with the golden light, there was a hong sound. The dust on the roof rustled and the pillars shook. The ding kunzi in Chu Xiaohong's hand shattered, causing blood to flow out of his mouth and nose. He was dizzy and took a few steps back. When the golden light dissipated, it was as if he was standing naked in the vast snow. He felt that there was no barrier around his body. Seeing that Zhang Yan had taken a step forward and was about to slap him again, he could not help but turn pale with fright. At this moment, he knew that in the face of such a powerful attack, it was useless to block it. In a moment of desperation, mysterious light shot out from the top of his head. With a roar, his red eyes swept towards Zhang Yan's body, trying to force him to stop and protect himself. Zhang Yan also shouted at this moment. At the same time, he took a step forward and the aura around him moved like a tide, scattering the mysterious light. At the same time, his momentum did not change and his palm still slammed towards Chu Xiaohong's head. When he shouted just now, the 4 people in the hall, including Gong Sun Mian, felt their eardrums buzzing. They felt like they were swaying left and right, as if they were in a great river. Such power caused their hearts to tremble. At this moment, they could see that if Zhang Yan's attack hit, Chu Xiaohong would undoubtedly die. Cheng Hao and He Renxian both exclaimed, "Fellow cultivator, you can't." Seeing that the situation was bad, Chu Xiaohong desperately circulated the mysterious light to try and escape. However, as Zhang Yan got closer, it was as if he had fallen into a swamp. He could only watch as the giant palm slammed down. With a boom, gray smoke filled the air and the hall seemed to shake a few times. When the dust settled, the 4 of them realized that there was a large hole in front of Zhang Yan and Chu Xiaohong had disappeared. The 4 of them were all cultivators, so their eyesight was very good. They could faintly see that the hole had become a pile of mush. Their faces were all pale. A cultivator at the third level of the mystic light realm was actually killed by Zhang Yan with just a raise of his hand. If it was them, they would probably end up the same way, right? Zhang Yan, however, returned to the table as if nothing had happened. He tore off the tattered Taoist robe that he had used too much strength and threw it to the side. He then took out a wine cup and raised it with a smile. "Everyone, don't let this junior spoil the mood. Come, this Li will toast everyone another cup." Cheng Hao and He Rinxian saw that he had killed Chu Shaohong and acted as if nothing had happened. A chill rose in their hearts and their faces became slightly stiff. On the other hand, Kuxiujuan smiled and said, "Taoist Li is right. Don't let people like Chu Shaohong spoil the mood. Come, this servant will toast Taoist brother." Zhang Yan looked at her a few times. He saw that she was pretty and her face was bright red. She didn't avoid his gaze and instead boldly stared back at him. She was much braver than Cheng Hao and He Rinxian. He slightly nodded his head and raised the cup in his hand, drinking it in one gulp. Although Kuxiujuan was a female cultivator, she was very straightforward and also drank it in one gulp. Gong Sun Mian secretly cursed Chu Shaohong in his heart for causing trouble for him for no reason. However, since this person was already dead, there was obviously no need to worry about him anymore. He had seen Zhang Yan's abilities just now, so he forced himself to be more spirited and started to chat and drink with Zhang Yan again. However, he was thinking about how to explain today's events to Zhang Yan after the banquet ended. Cheng Hao and He Rinxian, on the other hand, seemed to be absent-minded. They didn't know when the banquet ended and they walked out of the main hall in a daze. There were 5 of them when they came, but now that Chu Shaohong was dead, Gong Sun Mian stayed behind as if he had something to say to Zhang Yan. Therefore, including Kuxiujuan, only 3 of them returned. Once they were far away from the Baofeng temple, Cheng Hao and He Rinxian looked at each other and let out a long breath. In front of Zhang Yan, the pressure they felt was too great. Originally, they were still talking and laughing, but he suddenly exploded with killing intent. That tyrannical appearance when he attacked really made people's hearts palpitate. Cheng Hao chuckled and said, "This fellow Taoist Li acts without any scruples. During this treasure auction, it would be better for us to stay away from him." Kuxiujuan glanced at him and said, "Senior brother Cheng, there is no need to say such things. This fellow Taoist Li's cultivation is profound and his actions are magnanimous. In this servant's opinion, he is much better than Chu Shaohong, this arrogant person. If we go to the Xian Shan to obtain the solitary Chizoisha with him, wouldn't our chances be much higher?" However, He Rinxian shook his head and said, "This one thinks that senior brother Cheng's words are reasonable. I heard that cultivators who cultivate in the path of strength all need the remains of the great ancient demon. I don't know where this person came from, so we have to be on guard." Kuxiujuan sneered and said in a mocking tone, "This servant still doesn't know what you 2 senior brothers are planning. It's nothing more than seeing fellow Taoist Li kill Chu Shaohong and being afraid that this matter will implicate us. Is there a need to find so many excuses?" Cheng Hao couldn't help feeling a bit embarrassed and angry when she saw through his thoughts. He said, "So what? Senior brother Chu is a direct disciple of the Anxio sect and is highly regarded by the elders of the sect. He was killed by this surnamed Li, so how can the Anxio sect let this matter go? If we don't stay out of this matter, we will be seen by the Anxio sect as people who conspired to kill senior brother Chu, so we have no choice but to avoid arousing suspicion." He Rinxian nodded and said, "That's right. If we go with fellow Taoist Li now, wouldn't it seem like we conspired with him to kill senior brother Chu and invite trouble for ourselves?" Kuxiujuan said with disdain, "That Chu Shaohong was the one who challenged us, so he deserved to be killed. Fellow Taoist Li isn't afraid, so what are you afraid of?" She then looked at the 2 of them with a look of disdain and said, "In the end, it's just that you don't have the guts. You don't dare, but this servant does. Since you 2 are afraid of being implicated, then since our paths are different, we can't work together. Goodbye." After saying this, she turned around and jumped out of the flying boat, turning into a streak of light and flying away. Cheng Hao snorted and angrily scolded, "Pit! This little girl, relying on the support of her parents to make such sarcastic remarks, how would she know the hardships we are facing? The Anxio sect didn't just send senior brother Chu this time. I heard that there were 2 more senior brothers with higher cultivations than him. Although that Li Yuanba is powerful, how can he win against them? He Ren Xian also shook his head and sighed. Everyone has their own ambitions. If she walks together with Li Yuanba, she will suffer in the future. Sooner or later, she will regret it. Why don't we go visit senior brother Chu's 2 fellow disciples right now and inform them of this matter, so as to avoid future troubles? Cheng Hao nodded his head and agreed, that's reasonable. Who knows, we might be able to take this opportunity to get close to these 2 senior brothers and take care of them in the treasure gathering. If they exaggerated Zhang Yan's strength in front of Chu Xiaohong's fellow disciples, his 2 fellow disciples would most likely not chase them away and would instead rely on them. The 2 of them looked at each other and chuckled, having a tacit understanding. Target equals _blank. Chapter 225. The Taihao School had been established for more than 4,000 years. The school was divided into 4 mansions and 3 mountains. Even the Ningbi mansion, which was the last to open a mansion outside the school, had been passed down for 1,000 years. Although these 7 branches were one school, they had already formed their own schools, each with their own inheritance. On the other hand, the main mountain of the Taihao sect, Du Guang Mountain, was protected by the Hanxiu True Movement Great Void Defense Formation left by the founder of the sect. Moreover, there were 3 enlightened masters in the sect. Therefore, no matter in terms of status or strength, it was still far above the other manors. If the sect leader enlightened master wanted to summon the mansion masters for a meeting, they would have to come with a talisman. These 7 branches almost occupied all the blessed lands within the sphere of influence of the Taihao school, but other than that, there was one spiritual land that had not been touched. This was Mount Qingxin. This area was tens of thousands of miles long. It was originally an endless stretch of Tsangling Mountain, famous for the Ganoderma of unity that grew in the mountain. Although this was not the only place in the Donghua continent that had Ganoderma of unity, the Lingji in this mountain was of the highest quality. Even if a cultivator who had not reached the core formation realm obtained it, they could exchange it for excellent pills and talismans. Therefore, almost all the medicinal Ganoderma in this mountain was harvested. When the founder of the Taihao school passed by this place, he saw that the Ganoderma of unity was in danger of losing its roots. Therefore, he enclosed the entire mountain in the Hanxiu True Void Defense Formation. After that, he set a rule that no disciple of the Taihao school could have the Ganoderma of unity alone. Anyone who was fated could have it. Because of the protection of this famous formation, if others did not have the token of the Taihao school, it was impossible to force their way into the mountain. Therefore, they had to act according to the rules of the Taihao school. After thousands of years, they were used to it. According to the order of the founder of the Taihao school, every 6 years, he was allowed to send disciples to Mount Qingxuan to collect medicinal Ganoderma. However, all the high-quality Ganoderma had hands and feet. It would run all over the mountain, so it was not easy to catch it. But no matter who it was, the Taihao school only gave them 3 years. Whether or not they could obtain this item would depend on their own luck. However, Zhang Yan's goal was not these ordinary unbroken Qi Zoisha. He had once heard from Zhou Changju that among these unbroken Qi Zoisha, only the Zoisha ancestor had the best effect. It was not something that ordinary unbroken Qi Zoisha could compare to. If he could obtain this Zoisha ancestor, then this trip would not have been in vain. There are still 7 days left. Just now is the time to open the formation and enter the mountain. I didn't expect so many fellow Taoists to come here already. Zhang Yan stood on a protruding rock and looked at the endless mountain range in front of him. There, colorful canopies and clouds were piled up like stacks, climbing up the mountain range. In midair, spiritual qi shot into the sky, and light shot up for tens of thousands of feet. Cultivators from all over the Donghua continent had gathered here. At a rough glance, there were probably thousands of people. The Taihao school was indeed one of the top 10 mystical sects in the Donghua continent. Just this treasure auction alone was even more impressive than when he fought for the divine abode in the outer endless seas. He could not help but think that among these many people, there might be disciples from the Chinsong school. He wondered if he would run into any acquaintances. Gong Sun Mian shifted his gaze and looked around. He also lamented, in the past, there were not so many fellow Taoists who came here. But this time, I heard that an elder in my school had predicted the birth of a few high-quality medicinal Ganodermas. I'm afraid that many people have received this news, so they are all crowded together. Upon entering Mount Qingsuan, even if you were a disciple of the school, no matter if you returned empty-handed or not, everyone would only recognize you once in their lifetime. Unless you had the ability to break through the protective formation of the Taihao school, you would never be able to enter or leave. And the Qi Ganoderma in Mount Qingsuan was already a high-quality medicinal Ganoderma. With this news, it caused a stir in all directions. Cultivators who did not want to miss out on this opportunity all rushed over. Today, Xiujuan had changed into a green muslin dress and stood beside Zhang Yan and Gong Sun Mian. She snorted softly and said, "Even if there are high-quality medicinal Ganodermas, it's not up to us to take them. I'm already satisfied with a low-grade Ganoderma in my hands." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Before entering the treasure mountain, why are you so dejected, junior apprentice Sister Ku? You have to give it your all." Ku Xiujuan faced a direction and pouted. "I'm not trying to be depressing, but senior apprentice brotherly, look over there." Zhang Yan could not help but look in the direction she was pointing. He saw a young cultivator with his arms crossed standing on a Jinyun deer. His eyes were deep, and he was wearing a blue brocade robe embroidered with golden threads. He had high shoes with wide sleeves, a golden crown and a wide belt, and a cloud-inlaid silk sash around his waist. The cultivators who passed by him all looked wary. He was surrounded by dozens of people, some of whom were dressed similarly to him. They must be disciples of the same clan. When Zhang Yan looked over, his eyes also happened to look over. When their eyes met, the man slightly narrowed his eyes and calmly looked away. Ku Xiujuan said, "Brotherly, do you see him? That's Shi Yifan, a disciple of the Shi clan. Although he hasn't entered the Taihao school yet, in a few years, when he becomes a core formation cultivator, he only needs to enter the school to become a true disciple." Ku Xiujuan raised her delicate and white finger and pointed in another direction. "Brotherly, look over there. That's a disciple of the Wu clan." Zhang Yan turned his gaze again. This place was much grander than Shi Yifan's. Not only were there dozens of flying boats and carriages hovering in the air, but there were also hundreds of strong men and servants following them. He did not know if the person in charge had not arrived yet, or if it was done deliberately. For a moment, he could not tell who was in charge of this group of cultivators. Ku Xiujuan continued to point out a few people. These people were either disciples from large clans or Taoist sections. Finally, she sighed. "Brotherly, do you see? The top-grade medicinal mushrooms have probably been divided among these people. Even if they haven't reached an agreement, with their cultivation and the cultivators around them, how can we compete with them?" Apart from these disciples from Taoist sects, there were also many disciples from low-level clans. Together with their servants and strong men, these people made up a quarter of the people in this treasure auction. Compared to them, Ku Xiujuan and Zhang Yan did indeed seem extremely weak on the surface, and they were unable to contend against them. Gong Sun Mian chuckled. "Brother Ku, don't be discouraged. With Brotherly here, we may still have a chance." Gong Sun Mian was a disciple of Taihao school and came from a clan. If the day came when he condensed his core, his sect would have other medicinal mushrooms planted elsewhere. There was no need for him to compete with them in Mount Qingsun. That was why he looked so relaxed. Ku Xiujuan was also aware of this. She glared at him and snorted. Just as she was about to speak, her expression suddenly changed. She said in a low voice, "Why is she here too?" Zhang Yan looked back and saw a cloud couch descending from the sky. Behind the fluttering curtain was a woman in a red robe with wide sleeves. She allowed her snow-white arm to be exposed as she reclined on the couch. She looked indescribably lazy and carefree. There was a dazzling red dot on her lips. She had a tall nose and a pair of phoenix-like eyes. There was a fingernail-sized, blood-red jade hanging on her smooth forehead. Everyone seemed to be wary of her. When they saw this woman, the cultivators who were closer to her all flew off into the distance. Gong Sun Mian looked at the woman seriously. Suddenly, he thought of someone and blurted out, "Could she be that Yen Yuyo?" A hint of worry appeared on Ku Xiujuan's face. She nodded and said, "That's her. This is bad. It's rumored that this woman is temperamental and often kills people for no reason. If Brother Li and I enter Mount Qingzhen, we have to be careful and avoid her." The treasure Ganoderma auction was held once every 3 years and closed once every 3 years. Only cultivators below the core formation stage could enter. Because they had to stay for 3 years before they could come out, there were some cultivators who were unwilling to waste their time and would rather go elsewhere to search for Ganoderma of unity than come here. However, during these 3 years, due to the protection of the Grand Formation, those who entered could not enter and leave freely. As a result, some disciples from large clans came here just for fun. Because their clans had placed high hopes on these disciples, they had cultivated for hundreds of years. Those with slightly weaker temperaments could not dispel the accumulated depression in their hearts. Thus, there was no lack of people who acted recklessly when fighting for the Ganoderma. In the past, there were a few disciples from large clans who used this opportunity to adjust their temperaments and improve their cultivation. However, not only could they not defeat cultivators with powerful backgrounds, they did not dare to act rashly. Thus, they could only find rogue cultivators and cultivators from small sections. Therefore, these people wanted to attach themselves to large clans during the treasure Ganoderma auction. It was no wonder they acted like this. They really did not want to be killed for no reason. This Yen Yuyo was a direct descendant of the Xuanlong Yen clan, so there was no need for her to personally search for the Ganoderma. There were rumors that she had deviated from her cultivation and coupled with her strange temperament, it was obvious why she had come here. Seeing this woman, although Ku Xiujuan had seen Zhang Yan's strength that day, she could not help feeling worried. At this moment, on a mountain several kilometers away from the two of them, Chu Xiaohong's 2 fellow disciples, Pan Qing and Pan Ming, were also looking around. The 2 of them came from the same mother and looked extremely similar. They were both tall and thin with pale faces. Even their clothes were the same. Pan Qing was the oldest of the 2. He looked around and gently smiled. "The person who killed junior brother Chu is probably here, right?" Pan Yang's expression was somewhat cold as he lightly said, "I'm afraid so." Pan Qing smiled and said, "Brother, you're smarter than me. How do you think we should deal with this matter?" Pan Yang was silent for a while before he said that he and Cheng's words were inevitably exaggerated, so we can't believe them all. However, since junior brother Chu was defeated in a fair fight, I believe that Li Yuanba is also a powerful person. Even if we can win, it will be a Pyrrhic victory. There are still 7 days until we enter the mountain, so it would be unwise to fight him now. Pan Qing suddenly smiled and said, "Then what does brother think we should do?" Pan Yang's eyes flashed as he said, "You and I don't need to fight Li Yuanba at all. We just need to enter Mount Qingzhen. How can a rogue cultivator with no foundation live for 3 years?" Pan Qing smiled and nodded. "That's right, that's exactly what I was thinking." Pan Yang said in a deep voice, "Then what should we do with those 2? Pan Yang smiled playfully and waved his hand. "There's no harm in bringing them along. Who knows, they might be of some use." #target=_. Chapter 226. The secret hand of the Shao clan. While Zhang Yan was pacing around the foot of Mount Qingzhen, waiting to enter the formation, 5 people were walking back and forth among the thousands of cultivators. Their gazes would sweep over a few Taoists who were walking alone, and then they would walk away as if nothing had happened, as if they were looking for someone. 5 days later, these people met up in a hidden cave. One of them took out a crystal-clear pearl from his sleeve. As soon as he held it in his hand, it shone brilliantly, illuminating the dark cave. At the same time, it also revealed the appearance of this person. It was a tall and dignified elder with white hair. He looked around and happened to see a rock in front of him. With a flick of his sleeve, he swept away the wet moss and water on it, then put the pearl on it. He then turned around and asked, "Did you find anything?" Although the 4 people behind him were dressed differently, they were all ordinary-looking Taoists. One of them stood out and said, "Reporting to Elder Ancestor, the few of us have been searching around day and night, but we have found nothing these few days." The elder frowned slightly and said to himself, "Could it be that this Zhang Yan really didn't come here? That can't be. I heard that a top-grade medicinal herb appeared here. It's impossible for a disciple like him to not come here when he's out searching for herbs." The person in front of him cupped his hands and said, "Elder, since this person has a grudge with Taihao School in the outer endless sea, how could he be willing to show his true appearance? He must have used some powerful spell to hide his appearance. Since San Lang hasn't arrived yet, why don't we wait a little longer? He's always been meticulous, maybe he'll find something." The rest of them nodded. Although the elder looked serious, he was a very easy person to talk to. He also nodded and said, "All right, then we'll wait." After these people waited for another 2 days, they saw that the formation in Mount Qingsuan was about to open. Just as they were getting impatient, a ray of light that was as hazy as the moon came toward their hiding place. Someone said in surprise, "San Lang has returned." The elder's expression also brightened. He strode out of the cave and shouted, "Is it San Lang? You've been gone for 7 days, did you find anything?" The young Taoists also walked out and looked up, only to see that the streak of light descended, and a young cultivator with a shrewd face walked out. On his shoulder was an agile cat with black fur, and its gem-like eyes were looking around, as if it was extremely wary of these people. In the face of everyone's gazes, San Lang shook his head and said apologetically, "Eldest uncle, I haven't found any traces of that Zhang Yan." Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but feel disappointed. The old man made an "oh" sound, then glanced at the cat and asked doubtfully, "You can't even recognize the beauty-reflecting cat that the fellow Taoist from South Flower Sect gave you? Could it be that that person really hadn't arrived? This old man has miscalculated." San Lang, however, shook his head and said, "This nephew doesn't think so." The old man glanced at him and asked in surprise, "San Lang, what do you mean?" San Lang stretched out his hand and stroked the black cat, thinking, "Although this spiritual cat can recognize people by appearance, I heard that this Zhang Yan is on good terms with that disciple of Clearfeather Sect, so there might be a way to cover it up. Now that Taihao School has spread the news that there will be a top-grade Ganoderma at this treasure auction, how can he not take such a bait?" The old man nodded and said, "This old man thinks so too, but what can we do if we can't find him? 10 years ago, when news of the fight over the Immortals' residence in the open sea reached Donghua continent, it didn't cause a huge uproar, but they lost 3 Yuanying Zenrins and several true disciples. This caused some elders in Taihao School and South Flower Sect to be slightly angry, especially when they heard that Qinsong School disciple Zhang Yan had once helped Tao Zhenhong. A fierce Yuanying elder from South Flower Sect went to Qinsong School to demand an explanation. However, this elder was mysteriously thrown outside the gates of Qinsong School one day. After losing face, he returned to South Flower Sect that very night and locked himself inside. As for the Xiao clan, because Xiao Mu and his nephew had not returned for a long time, they paid particular attention to this matter. There were even elders in the clan who guessed that these two had most likely been captured by Tao Zhenhong, and it might even have something to do with Zhang Yan. Originally, the Xiao clan had wanted to send disciples to deal with this matter and capture Zhang Yan for questioning. However, this matter had been stirred up by the South Flower Sect elder, and everyone in Qinsong School knew about it. The Xiao clan was being watched by many people, and they didn't dare to act rashly. It had to be said that the situation in Qinsong School was different from before. Qin Mabai had already tried to eliminate several disobedient families, and the large families in the school all felt the pressure. It was not convenient for the Xiao clan to leave any evidence at this time, in case the master and disciple took the opportunity to make things difficult for them. Thus, they could only ask the Ho clan, which was related to them by marriage, to investigate this matter. The elders of the Xiao clan secretly instructed the Ho clan to try to capture Zhang Yan and then find out the whereabouts of Xiao Mu and his nephew. If he was unwilling to comply, they could kill him, but they had to do it secretly. There were no more than 100 people in the Ho clan. If they acted, they wouldn't attract too much attention. Even if they made a mistake, the Shao clan could make them disappear with a wave of their hand. They wouldn't leave behind any evidence. The people standing outside the cave were all disciples of the Hou clan, and this old man was the leader of the Hou clan, Hobaxu. Although he had tried his best to find traces of Zhang Yan, the latter had not set foot in Donghua for 10 years, so his search was fruitless. Hobaxu was silent for a long time, and in the end he said, "In my opinion, why don't we look elsewhere first? 3 years later, when the formation is reactivated, we might have a chance of finding this person." At this time, Hou Sanlang suddenly knelt on the ground and said in a low voice, "Uncle, I want to enter Mount Qingsuan to investigate. I hope you will allow me to do so." Hobaxu was shocked and said, "Sanling." Then, his expression changed as if he had thought of something. He said gently, "Stand up and talk." Hou Sanlang didn't argue. He immediately stood up and patted his knees. He moved closer and said in a low voice, "Uncle, since the Shao clan has borrowed that magic treasure, even if I can't find this person, I want to use it to enter Mount Qingsuan and get a medicinal mushroom. It's better than having it taken back by the Shao clan." Hobaxu nodded and said in a low voice, "You're right. You are the most outstanding disciple of our clan. Since this treasure is in our hands, why don't you use it? Take it today." He took out a magic treasure from his sleeve and stuffed it into Hou Sanlang's hand. Then, his expression turned serious and said, "But you need to be careful. That Zhang Yan fought 100 people alone in the outer endless sea. Among them were the true disciples of the Southern Flower School and the Taihao School, but none of them were a match for him. Don't act recklessly just because you have this magic treasure. If you really meet him, remember not to act rashly unless you have the confidence." Hou Sanlang took the 2 magic treasures and took a deep breath. He said solemnly, "Yes, uncle. I understand." Hou Sanlang bowed and took 2 steps back. Then he turned around and leaped into the air, his body turning into a stream of light. He was very excited in the air. Although he didn't find Zhang Yan just now, he felt that there were a few people who were very suspicious and had been secretly watching them. If he could find and kill Zhang Yan this time, the Shao clan would fulfill their promise. Not only would they bestow this magical treasure to him, they would also marry one of their daughters to him. They would also promise to teach him a high-level cultivation technique. At that time, his position in the clan would be unparalleled. At this time, on the Green Inch Mountain, there was a long and drawn-out sound of a bell. Under the gaze of thousands of cultivators, the green curtain that was originally rippling like waves of light in front of them floated and slowly dispersed, revealing a distant landscape of mountains, hills and valleys, creeks, valleys and mountains. From afar, there were green clouds that supported the light, covering the misty mountains and valleys. Seeing that the formation had been activated, there was a commotion among the crowd. Shi Yifan, who was standing at the front, had a bright gleam in his eyes. He shouted and reined in the Hornjinyun deer he was sitting on. A 5-colored cloud rose from his 4 legs and flew into the sky. Relying on this auspicious beast, he was the first to rush into the green curtain miasma that had yet to completely dissipate. Suddenly, a white light flew up from where the Wu clan's disciple was standing, and a voice came out. "Junior sister Yen, I'll be going first." "Brother Shi, wait, I'm coming." Yen Yuyo was originally leaning lazily on the couch, but when she heard this, she raised her eyebrows and snorted. She slapped the cloud couch beneath her, and in an instant, a fiery red light soared up. She shook off the servants behind her and rushed forward without showing any signs of weakness. Almost at the same time as that person, she entered the green curtain. With these 3 people taking the lead, thousands of bright lights that resembled silver stars and fire snakes instantly soared up from the bottom of the mountain. It was the cultivators in the area riding on their escape lights and hurrying into Mount Qingsuan. Ku Xiujuan, who was standing opposite Zhang Yan, smiled and said, "Brother Ku, there's no time to lose. Let's get up and enter the mountain as well." Ku Xiujuan hurriedly nodded in response. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and bid his farewells to Gong Sun Mian, and then he executed a flying technique from the carefree technique of truth. He didn't seem to make any movements, Yet he transformed into a cool breeze that swiftly floated away without a trace. Ku Xiujuan saw that his escape technique was excellent and praised him in her heart. With a shout, she also got up and followed the sound of the wind. In the blink of an eye, Zhang Yan rushed through the green screen that seemed to have dissipated and landed in a valley. Not far away from him was a clear stream filled with pebbles. The surrounding trees were quiet, and there was no trace of people. Only the cries of apes could be heard coming from the top of the cliff. The original Mount Qingsuan was also a spiritual land. In addition, for thousands of years, the earth veins were connected by a formation. Not only did the spiritual energy not disperse, it even faintly showed signs of condensing into spiritual veins. If one cultivated here, it would not be much worse than an ordinary cave abode. Zhang Yan looked around and found a rock to sit down cross-legged, waiting for Ku Xiujuan to come. However, after waiting for half a day, not only did he not see this woman rushing to meet up with him, he did not even see the shadow of a cultivator. He could not help but feel a little strange. While he was thinking about the reason, he suddenly saw a red shadow flashing in the distance and a escape light landed on the opposite cliff. His spirit was roused. He looked up and saw a graceful woman standing there with a pair of cold eyes looking at him. It was Yen Yuyo. Target equals _blank. Chapter 227. Seeing that it wasn't Ku Xiujuan, Zhang Yan only glanced at Yen Yuyo before looking away. He sat back on the rock and ignored her. Yen Yuyo, on the other hand, had a surprised expression on her face. She didn't do things according to common sense and her temperament was unstable. Her family could be said to be one of the giant families. Therefore, all the disciples of the Xian race in the same generation were wary of her. Many of them even looked at her with hostility. If wandering cultivators saw her, they wouldn't even have the time to hide, so how would they dare to look her in the eye? Moreover, looking at Zhang Yan, he clearly didn't care about her at all. Yen Yuyo was unhappy that someone had entered Mount Green inch before her, so she also came in first with her followers. However, she was used to being served by others. Every time she went in or out, she would have to line up in a battle formation and be surrounded by attendants. Now that she was alone, she couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. She had no choice but to stop and wait for those servants to catch up. She was bored, but seeing Zhang Yan was very different from ordinary cultivators, she couldn't help but be a bit interested. A bright light flashed in her phoenix-like eyes. She raised her delicate hand, and an oppressive flame flew out from her sleeve. With a "chi-la" sound, it scorched the atmosphere and attacked Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and his eyes flashed. Looking at the momentum of this profound light, he knew that this woman was testing him. However, before this profound light could even approach him, a wave of heat assaulted him, scorching the green grass in its path until it was charred and curled up. Zhang Yan couldn't help but be surprised. After reaching the third level of the Xian light realm, one's aura should be condensed in one place so that it wouldn't be damaged or leaked. For this woman's fire attribute profound light to give off a wave of heat as it flew, it meant that there was either a problem with the Xian Qi technique, or something happened during the cultivation process that caused the Xian Qi technique to not be pure and complete. Zhang Yan guessed that there was a problem with this woman's Xian Qi technique. This must be the reason why there was a problem with this woman's Xian Qi technique. In the blink of an eye, the black light arrived in front of him. He narrowed his eyes and sat there without getting up. He let out a heavy "mph." This sound was like muffled thunder rolling by, and it instantly shook the entire valley and startled the birds. This ball of mysterious light that was like a vermilion scale and a red centipede was originally blazing with arrogance, but at this moment, it seemed to have encountered an invisible wave of air, and it was dispiritedly swept back and dispersed completely in an instant. Zhang Yan looked calm. It was as if he had done something insignificant. It would not be easy for him to deal with that kind of condensed mystic light. At most, he could only block it by the side. But now that there was a flaw in Yen Yuyo's mystic light, he could disperse it with a single breath. Although there was only a slight deviation in the middle, in the eyes of these cultivators, it was a huge flaw. Yen Yuyo exclaimed in surprise. A look of surprise appeared on her face. She was just bored for a while. He wanted to probe Zhang Yan's background and see what kind of tricks he had up his sleeves. However, he never expected that his profound light would be broken so easily. It was just this one face-to-face encounter. With her eyesight, she could naturally tell that Zhang Yan cultivated the strength path, and she couldn't help but take a few more glances. It was just that after thinking about it a few times, she couldn't think of any outstanding disciple of the big Taoist sects that she knew who looked like Zhang Yan. After a moment of silence, she suddenly opened her mouth and said, "Let me ask you, are you willing to be a guest of my clan?" For a direct descendant of a big Taoist clan like her, although the matters of cultivation would be prepared by the clan. But when it came to fighting for certain magic treasures and cultivation techniques, it was inevitable. It was inevitable to fight openly and covertly with disciples of the same clan, but she couldn't do everything by herself. If she could recruit a few wandering cultivators with decent cultivation, or the disciples of a declining family, not only could they help her do some inconvenient things, they could also be a great help at critical moments. She saw that Zhang Yan's cultivation was not ordinary, and she could tell that he was a rare strength path cultivator at a glance, so she couldn't help but think of recruiting him. She relied on her identity as a disciple of the Yan clan, so if the other party wasn't a disciple of the 10 Taoist sects, he most likely wouldn't refuse. But she didn't expect that when she said that, it caused a burst of laughter. He said, "This little lady wants me, Li Yuanba, to submit, but I'm afraid she doesn't have the qualifications." This laughter rumbled in the valley, and it was extremely arrogant. It was obvious that he didn't put the Yan clan in his eyes at all. Yan Yuyu's jade face couldn't help but turn cold, and she shouted, "How dare you!" She flicked her sleeve, causing a fiery ray of light to shoot out from behind her. This ray of light converged into a ball above her head, and it coiled and fluttered about while emitting the sound of a whirlwind that was extremely clamorous. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised, and he clenched his fists, making a cracking sound. If this woman didn't know what was good for her, he didn't mind being ruthless here. However, just as the swords were drawn, dozens of rays of light flew over. When they saw Yan Yuyu, they all greeted, "Wife." A middle-aged woman in her 40s landed beside her. This woman had an anxious expression, and she whispered a few words into Yan Yuyu's ear. Yan Yuyu frowned, snorted, and retracted the light behind her. She first gave the woman a few instructions, then turned around and said, "You're Li Yuanba? What do you want? Cultivation method? Beauty? Talisman? Or entering Tai House school as a disciple? As long as you agree to be my right-hand man for 30 years, I can grant you everything. Once you've thought it through, you can come to 1,000 Feet Mountain to find me." She seemed to be in a hurry to leave, so after she finished speaking, she didn't wait for Zhang Yan's response and said to the middle-aged woman, "Aunt Shu, let's go." She turned around and went up the jade couch behind her. The gauze curtain fell down, covering her slender and graceful figure. "Guess what?" The middle-aged woman responded submissively, then looked up and down at Zhang Yan. She snorted, then called out, and the group of people stepped onto their celestial tools, disappearing into the distance in just a moment. Zhang Yan looked at the direction in which these people disappeared, but it was towards a mountain ridge that pierced straight into the clouds. The peak of this mountain couldn't be seen, and it was like a barrier that stretched across the sky. He didn't know how big it was. When he entered the mountain, he had heard that there were 5 peaks in this Green Inch mountain that had the best Chizoisha, so this 1,000 Feet mountain must be heading towards that place. He came here to find the Zoisha ancestor. Although he didn't have any clues at the moment, he would definitely go and investigate this place in the future. After waiting for the time it took for an incense stick to burn, he saw a familiar-looking light flying over from afar. He stood up and said with a smile, "Why are you so late, fellow Taoist Ku?" Ku Xiujuan landed in front of him and said with some embarrassment, "I've made fellow Taoist wait for a long time. On my way here, I met a martial uncle who used to cultivate in the same place as my mother. We unwittingly chatted a lot, so I was delayed." She hesitated again, then said in a low voice, "This martial uncle tried his best to invite me to go with him. I was thinking that if fellow Taoist Li is willing, why don't you come with me? We can look after each other." Before Ku Xiujuan came here, she was originally very ambitious, but after seeing the power of those disciples from the aristocratic families, she felt that it would be too difficult to obtain the Qi Zoisha. She and Zhang Yan were a little alone. Moreover, this martial uncle of hers was a kind person, and he took great care of the younger generation. Thus, when he sent out the invitation, she was moved and wanted to invite Zhang Yan to go with her. Zhang Yan pondered for a while. Now that he had just entered Green Inch Mountain, he was still unfamiliar with the terrain, so he wasn't in a hurry to investigate the Zoisha ancestor. Since there were still 3 years left, he might as well travel with these people first and make plans later. He said straightforwardly, "All right, then please lead the way, Junior Marshal Sister Ku." Ku Xiujuan's face lit up, and she said cheerfully, "Senior Marshal Brother, please come with me." Then she leaped into the air and turned into a long rainbow, leading the way. Zhang Yan also used an escape technique to follow behind her. In less than an hour, they saw 7 people waiting on top of a cliff. This group consisted of both Taoist and secular cultivators, and the one standing at the front was a middle-aged Taoist with a long beard and a robe on his head. As soon as Ku Xiujuan landed on the cloud, she greeted the Taoist as Martial Uncle Bao. Then, she turned around and invited Zhang Yan over, saying, "Fellow Taoist Li, let me introduce you. This is Martial Uncle Bao Dingheng, a senior of the Yuanyang sect." Zhang Yan glanced at this Taoist and saw that he was also at the 3rd level of the mystic light realm, but there was a faint flame between his eyebrows. It was obvious that he had cultivated the true flame in the aperture. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "I'm Li Yuanba. Nice to meet you, Taoist." Bao Dingheng looked at Zhang Yan with an amiable expression, then he smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Li, there's no need to be so polite. I heard from my martial niece that your cultivation is profound, and your Xian Qi is amazing. Now that I've met you, I can see that it's true." Zhang Yan exchanged a few words with him, and Bao Dingheng didn't put on airs. He personally introduced the people behind him to Zhang Yan one by one. Those people were more polite to Zhang Yan, but when it was the turn of a Taoist named Fang he glanced at Zhang Yan and said in a strange tone, "I heard that fellow Taoist Li is a cultivator who cultivates the strength path, and your cultivation is high. I only hope that it's true. We don't bring any idlers with us." Seeing that he was being a little rude, Bao Dingheng looked at him with blame and said unhappily, "What are you talking about? We're all the same. Since we've met here, it's fate that we should help each other. Junior brother, you shouldn't have said that." Fang he mumbled and thought to himself, "Another one to share." This Qi Zoisha grew in clusters, and there were usually a few or even a dozen of them in one place. However, these things had hands and feet, and they would run far away when they smelled the scent of living people. Putting aside whether they could successfully find them or not, even if they managed to catch them, no one could guarantee that there would be enough of them. If there were too few, they would have to search a few more places. It would be fine if everyone here were close friends, but Ku Xiujuan and Zhang Yan just happened to bump into each other on the road, so Fang he couldn't help but feel a sense of rejection. When Ku Xiujuan left to invite Zhang Yan over, he complained a lot. Bao Dingheng didn't think so. Ku Xiujuan was his junior, not an outsider, so how could he not take care of her? Besides, he saw that Ku Xiujuan held Zhang Yan in high esteem, and he heard that she would only be accompanied by Zhang Yan on this trip, so he thought a little more. He even thought that Zhang Yan was the Tao companion of Ku Xiujuan's heart, so he treated him as one of his own. He ignored Fang He's words and said to Zhang Yan with a smile, "Although this green Siyuan mountain is several tens of thousands of li away, this Qi Zoisha has always liked to live in the source of the earth veins. Therefore, most of them gather in these 5 peaks, and the disciples of the large clans mostly go to the 1,000-feet peak. We won't compete with them. The nearest peak from here is the 9 Heads Peak, so why don't we go there first to try our luck? Target equals _blank. Chapter 228. The abandoned disciple of Yuan Yang Mount Qingsun was tens of thousands of miles wide. Although there were thousands of cultivators who entered the mountain, it was like a stone thrown into the sea, not even a ripple could be seen. When Zhang Yan's group went to the 9 Heads Peak, They could still see a few streaks of light at first, but after half a day, not a single person could be seen. There were 9 majestic mountains on the 9 Heads Peak, and they could be seen from afar. A Taoist wearing a tall hat said with a smile, "The number of 9 Heads Peak is 9, and there are 9 of us now. Doesn't it mean that today's luck is on us?" Bao Dingheng laughed when he heard this, and said, "Fellow Taoist Gao's words are brilliant." The group flew very quickly, and they arrived at the mountain ridge near noon. In the end, they stood on a high rock. At this time, a hunchbacked old man with a face full of frost walked a few steps on the rock and looked around. He saw green vines and weeds coming out of the cracks in the rocks, and sometimes a few frolicking monkeys hanging on the withered vines swaying back and forth. He couldn't help but nod in satisfaction and said, "This place is very good." He untied a bag on his back and took out a stone plate from it. He also took out an incense stick and inserted it into it. He closed his wrinkled hand, and when he let go, the incense stick was already lit, and white smoke came out in a straight line. This smoke seemed to be solid, and it didn't move at all even when the mountain wind blew over. Ever since Zhang Yan arrived among these people, he had been paying attention to this person. Previously, he heard Bao Dingheng call this person Elder Shi, and seeing that he was using a magic tool when flying, he knew that this person was only at clear qi cultivation, and his aura was obscure and impure. It was obvious that he was not from a profound sect, but this person didn't seem weak in front of everyone at all. What was even more strange was that because this old man's cultivation couldn't compare to a profound light realm cultivator, he had to stop and adjust his meridians on the way. Not only did the others not object to this, they even intentionally or unintentionally protected him in the middle, as if he was an extremely important person to him. Although Bao Dingheng was the one leading the way, whenever the old man made a move, Bao Dingheng would look at him inquisitively. At this moment, when Zhang Yan saw his actions, he was already certain that this old man definitely possessed a secret technique that could locate the whereabouts of the single qi Ganoderma. It was no wonder that Bao Dingheng looked so confident earlier and didn't care even if there were 2 more people. It must be because of this old man. Mr. Shi narrowed his eyes as he looked at the wisp of white smoke. From time to time, he would move the stone plate beneath him. Every once in a while, he would look up at the sky. They waited for 2 hours, but no one revealed an anxious or impatient expression. Fang He even stared at the white smoke without blinking. His fingers kept tapping the back of his hand, and there was a faint look of anticipation on his face. Ku Xiujuan didn't understand, but she was a latecomer in this group and a junior. If Bao Dingheng didn't say, she couldn't ask. However, she could vaguely guess the purpose of this old man, so she also stared without blinking. After another 2 hours, a bright light suddenly flashed through Shi Xiangong's murky eyes. The white smoke changed slightly and floated south as if it was being pulled by someone. Fang He was the most excited and hurried over to say, "Mr. Shi, should we?" Mr. Shi looked at him indifferently and said in a deep voice, "No rush, wait a bit longer." Fang He hurriedly said, "Yes, yes, yes." Another hour later, the white smoke seemed to be pulled by someone and floated to the west. Mr. Shi's expression changed and he said excitedly, "Found it. Such a large amount of wood spiritual qi, there are probably no less than 15 of this medicinal Ganoderma." Hearing this, the expressions of everyone present became excited. Bao Dingheng was the calmest among them. He came up to the old man and cupped his hands, asking for guidance. "May I ask Mr. Shi, what should we do next?" Mr. Shi stroked the sparse white beard on his chin and thought for a while. He looked at the white smoke and said, "Wait a bit longer." Everyone looked at each other. Fang He was even more anxious to say something, but Mr. Shi glanced at him and said leisurely, "The medicinal Ganoderma hides in the presence of yang and shrinks in the presence of yin. It hides in the roots day after day. Only at the intersection of yin and yang will it break out of the ground to absorb spiritual qi. It can't return for a while, so capturing it now is the safest. Otherwise, it's not that I'm looking down on you, but I'm afraid you won't even be able to capture one." Bao Dingheng nodded and said, "We'll listen to Mr. Shi's arrangement." When Zhang Yan heard this, he secretly remembered it in his heart. He wanted to see how confident this old man would be if he followed the old man's method. He then looked at the stone plate and the curving white smoke on it, thinking to himself, I wonder if this thing will be useful against the Ganoderma ancestor. If there's a chance, I'll have to knock on it from the side. At this time, it was still early from Een. When they heard Bao Dingheng's words, everyone present split up and found a place to take shelter from the wind and rain to meditate. When it was around the time of Yang, Mr. Shi suddenly saw the white smoke tremble, and his expression changed. He lifted the stone plate and said, Taoist Bao, quickly come with this old man. Bao Dingheng was startled and hurriedly released the escaping light. The others were also alarmed, and without waiting for orders, they all soared into the sky. Mr. Shi took up his artifact and was about to fly into the sky when he saw several escaping lights falling into the forest in front of him. He couldn't help but tense up. Fong He cried out involuntarily, Not good, someone beat us to it. He turned his head and asked sternly, Mr. Shi, didn't you say that apart from you, no one else knows how to search for the medicinal Ganoderma? Mr. Shi's expression was as dark as water, and he only snorted. Bao Dingheng, on the other hand, did not panic. He waved his sleeve and said, Junior Marshal Brother Fong, what nonsense are you spouting? Mr. Shi's ability is unique in this world. Although this Nine Heads Peak is vast, I'm sure there are many cultivators who have come here to search. It's probably just a coincidence. Fong He said in a strange tone, That's right, this Nine Heads Peak is so vast, and we've never seen a single person before, so why did we run into one? When Bao Dingheng heard this, he also frowned. Mr. Shi stood there expressionlessly and did not say anything to defend himself. Zhang Yan looked ahead a few times, but he said with a smile, I thought it was a coincidence that those people came here. Everyone, please take a look. He pointed ahead and said, Those escaping lights are moving up and down erratically without a clue. They're just randomly running around. If they really found the hiding place of the medicinal Ganoderma, they wouldn't even have the time to cover their tracks, so why would they make such a big fuss? Bao Dingheng's eyes lit up. He turned his head to look at Zhang Yan and said in agreement, Fellow Taoist Li is right. When everyone heard this, they also felt that Zhang Yan's words made sense. They all nodded in agreement, and their suspenseful thoughts were slightly put at ease. Mr. Shi also looked over and nodded slightly at him. Fong He snorted and said, Since that's the case, we need to quickly chase this group of people away to avoid alerting the medicinal Ganoderma. Bao Dingheng glanced over and sneered, There's no need for us to look for it. They're already here. As expected, a ray of escaping light came over from the sky and stopped in front of this group of people, revealing a cultivator with a short beard and wide shoulders. When this person opened his mouth, he spoke in a loud voice that startled the birds. He said, I was wondering who it was. So it's Senior Marshal Brother Bao and Junior Marshal Brother Fong. Unfortunately, a few of our fellow Taoists and I arrived here first, and we've already circled this place. You guys should go somewhere else. Before Bao Dingheng could speak, Fong He had already jumped out and pointed at this person, scolding, Lan Yuchen, so you're an abandoned disciple. We've already arrived here a long time ago. If anyone wants to leave, it should be you guys. Lan Yuchen laughed and said, Fong He, why are you in such a hurry? Could it be that you've already found out that there's a medicinal Ganoderma here? When he heard this, Fong He's voice could not help but become sluggish. Lan Yuchen was originally just joking. After all, this medicinal Ganoderma was extremely difficult to find, so one could only rely on luck. However, when he saw Fong He's expression, he could not help but feel suspicious. He thought to himself, could it be that there's really a medicinal Ganoderma here? Then he was secretly ashamed and thought to himself, who cares about it so much? In short, we'll just chase them away. He chuckled and said, Senior Brother Bao, if you insist on occupying this place, then come and fight with us first. I, Lan Yuchen, will be waiting for you up ahead. Come if you have the guts. After he finished speaking, he did not dare to stay any longer. He hurriedly flew into the forest in the front, obviously to meet up with his companions. Fong He stomped his feet and said, Senior brother, why don't you make him stay? Bao Dingheng frowned. He looked up at the bright moon in the sky and said slowly, Sir, if we fight here, will we scare the medicinal Ganoderma away? Sir pondered for a moment, then sighed and said, Taoist Bao, the only thing we can do now is to try and fight. I can see that these people have no idea how to find the medicinal Ganoderma. They're just going around randomly based on hearsay. If the medicinal Ganoderma is really disturbed and hibernates underground, I'm afraid it won't come out even after 10 days or half a month. When Bao Dingheng heard this, he made a decision in his heart. A cold light flashed in his eyes as he said, It seems that the only way to solve this problem is to get rid of all these people. That Lan Yuchen was originally an abandoned disciple of my sect. Today I, Bao Dingheng, will clean up the sect. Fellow Taoists, are you willing to help me? Fang He agreed very quickly and said, Of course I'll follow senior brother. He then looked around and said, What about you? Ku Xiujuan immediately said, Whatever martial uncle Bao says. The remaining 4 people were a little hesitant. The Taoist with a tall crown said, We don't know about the grudges in your sect, but we've heard that although this Lan Yuchen is an abandoned disciple of your Yuanyang sect, he's still valued by Taoist master Wufeng of your sect. If we kill this person, won't. Naturally, Bao Dingheng could hear the unfinished meaning in his words. He said in a clear voice, Fellow Taoists, I also understand your concerns. There's no need to trouble fellow Taoists with Lan Yuchen. I can deal with him myself. As soon as he said this, the remaining 4 people all heaved a sigh of relief. They looked at each other and said in unison, We're willing to help fellow Taoist. Bao Dingheng nodded. He called Ku Xiujuan over and told her to take good care of Sir. Then he turned to Zhang Yan and said, Fellow Taoist Li, please stand guard outside. If you see anyone trying to escape, you must not let a single one of them go. Zhang Yan knew that Bao Dingheng hadn't seen him fight before and was worried about him, so he made this arrangement. However, even if he wasn't chosen, someone else had to do it. He smiled and immediately nodded in agreement. After Bao Dingheng finished saying a few words, he shouted and led everyone to fly into the forest with a murderous aura. However, Zhang Yan rode the wind to the top of the cloud and looked down. The forest was calm at first, but in less than a moment, there were flashes of light, sword lights, and angry shouts. It was obvious that a fierce battle was going on. At this moment, he suddenly heard a deafening sound. Under the curtain of the night, there seemed to be thousands of rays of light flashing like silver snakes. He heard Bao Dingheng's shocked and angry voice, Lan Yuchen, how did you get this sword board? Lan Yuchen's arrogant voice also sounded. Bao Dingheng, you didn't expect me to have this move, did you? Today, I will make you pay for what you gave me with that sword strike of yours. Go to hell. As soon as Zhang Yan heard this, his eyes flashed. He suddenly flew into the air and rushed toward the forest below with the momentum of wind and clouds. Target equals _blank. Chapter 229. In front of Lan Yuchen floated an octagonal sword disc that was shining with silver light. As it rotated, it flashed wildly. Hundreds of flying swords flew back and forth like weaves, forcing the people who came with Bao Dingheng to the outside, leaving him alone under the sword formation to struggle bitterly. Bao Dingheng only had 2 magic swords in his hands. Although he was proficient in swordsmanship and could barely resist the flying sword light, he also knew that once Lan Yuchen's sword formation was launched, it was only a matter of time before he was defeated and killed if he didn't have the corresponding means to restrain and resist it. He could not help but hate his protective martial uncle, who had expelled Lan Yuchen from the sect, but still allowed him to carry this magic tool. It was obvious that he was deliberately conniving. If he still had a chance to escape, he would definitely go back and complain to his master in the future. Every disciple of the Yuanyang sect had a sword plate with them, which could condense gold energy into a sword formation. When the disciples of the sect had a sword plate in hand, there was a huge difference in strength. But once they were expelled from the sect, this magic tool would be confiscated. This was also the reason why Bao Dingheng was confident that he could defeat Lan Yuchen. However, the other party had unexpectedly taken out the sword board and was 1 step ahead of him. As a result, Bao Dingheng was caught off guard. Other than desperately defending himself, he didn't even have the time to use his sword board. The grudge between Lan Yuchen and Bao Dingheng had been going on for a long time, and it was no longer clear who was in the right and who was in the wrong. Since he had this opportunity to take revenge today, how could he miss it? Seeing that Bao Dingheng was already sweating profusely and no longer had the demeanor of a disciple of the Yuanyang sect, Bao Dingheng shouted and activated a magic art. The flying swords condensed from gold energy suddenly sped up, converged into a waterfall-like sword stream, and slashed down one after another. The two magic swords below had withstood no less than 100 sword lights in an instant. Even though they were of high quality, they were still unable to withstand the attacks. Although they were of high quality, they could not hold on any longer. After 2 wails, they broke one after another. When people like Bao Dingheng and Lan Yuchen, who knew each other very well, fought, once one party fell into a disadvantageous position, the other party would never give the other party a chance to turn the tables. Therefore, under Lan Yuchen's constant pressure, Bao Dingheng already knew his ending. The reason why he could hold on until now. He just refused to give up and die. At this moment, when he saw the 2 magic swords that he carried with him being destroyed, he realized that it was futile to continue struggling. He let out a bitter laugh and closed his eyes to await death. Lan Yuchen saw that his old enemy was about to die under his sword. He could not help but let out an extremely presumptuous laugh. However, at this moment, a figure suddenly barged into the sword array. This person's aura was turbulent, and wherever he passed by, the dense leaves and branches in the forest scattered as if they had been attacked by a storm. Then he stood in front of Bao Dingheng. Lan Yuchen was startled at first, then he sneered coldly, "You're courting death." A ferocious look appeared on his face. He activated his magic power. The sword disc spun faster and faster. In an instant, hundreds of flying swords formed from gold chi rained down like locusts. More than half of them collided with this person's body, and a series of concentrated sounds of metal colliding rang out. Under this curtain of night, he could actually see the sparks that shot out when the flying swords collided with that person's body. However, what shocked Lan Yuchen was that not only did this person not die under such violent flying sword chi, he even pushed his hand against the rain of swords, slapping away the flying swords that had yet to reach him. Then, he let out a loud shout and leaped forward. It was as if a sudden clap of thunder had occurred on the flat ground. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew, and a wave of air pressed down. He actually took a step forward and arrived in front of Lan Yuchen, throwing a punch at him. Lan Yuchen was greatly shocked. In such a hurry, he could not care about anything else. He clasped his hands together, and the 2 magic swords that were suspended in midair let out a buzzing and trembling sound. The swords turned and slashed at the person in front of him. Lan Yuchen had hoped to be able to stop this person. These 2 magic swords were not much weaker than the 2 in Bao Dingheng's hands, but under this person's punch, they actually shattered with a sound. This time, he was even more shocked. Almost in an instant, he knew that this person was definitely a strength path cultivator. At this moment, his only thought was to get away from this person. How could he care about anything else? With a wave of his sleeve, he threw out a copper basin-shaped magic tool to block in front of him. He himself rode on a profound light and wanted to escape. As soon as this copper basin-shaped magic tool fell, a 7-colored light appeared faintly. However, before it could release its light, a golden hammer heavily smashed down. With a loud bang, this object had actually been smashed flat to the ground by the hammer. Just now, Lan Yuchen was half a zhang away from the ground on his light when he suddenly felt a strong gust of wind from behind him. He felt as if he was sitting on a small boat, swaying up and down and on the verge of collapse. He did not need to turn his head to know that it was that person who had caught up. He panicked. Once a strength path cultivator was about a zhang away from the ground, every move they made would be followed by wind and clouds. If he was held back for a moment and waited for Bao Dingheng, who was not far away, to catch his breath, would he still be alive then? Thinking of this, he steeled his heart and summoned the sword plate to block behind him. He only heard a loud bang behind him, and the sword plate was smashed to one side. However, taking this opportunity, Lan Yuchen dashed forward as fast as lightning. As if he had escaped from a swamp, His body suddenly felt light. He let out a shrill cry and flew out. Bao Dingheng had originally thought that he was going to die, but who knew that someone would suddenly come to save him? With this small opening, he did not have time to rejoice. With a shout, he took out the sword plate. Seeing that Lan Yuchen had leaped to escape, he did not have time to set up a sword formation. With a point of his finger, he sent a sword flying. Bao Dingheng hurriedly opened his mouth and spat out a white breath to stop the sword ray that was slashing toward him. He turned around and turned into a ray of light, wanting to escape. At this moment, Zhang Yan saw an opening. How could he give him this chance? With a loud shout, he threw the golden hammer in his hand, which turned into a ray of golden light and flew out. Lan Yuchen was flying in the air, but he could not dodge in time. The hammer smashed into the side of his chest, and he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. With a scream, he flew out horizontally. Bao Dingheng was also swift. He did not give Lan Yuchen any chance to turn the tables. He formed a hand seal, and the sword ray in the air arrived. It circled around Lan Yuchen's neck once and cut off his head. A headless corpse fell from midair. Bao Dingheng's expression did not change. With a point of his finger, a sword ray descended and ruthlessly scattered the primordial spirit. Both sides of the battle had witnessed Lan Yuchen's death. The cultivations of those who came with Lan Yuchen were far inferior to him, so when they saw him die, they didn't have the will to continue fighting, and all of them fled in all directions. However, they hadn't flown far before they were obstructed by streaks of light that appeared out of nowhere. In their helplessness, they could only raise their spirits and continue fighting. Bao Dingheng looked around. At first, there were 5 people by Lan Yuchen's side, but now there were only 3 left. Moreover, they were surrounded and attacked by his side. He knew that there was no need for him to fight anymore. He raised his hand and put the sword and sword plate back into his sleeve. Then he cupped his fist toward Zhang Yan and solemnly said, "Thanks to fellow Taoist Li's help, I's life was saved." Zhang Yan smiled and cupped his hands in return. "You're too courteous, Taoist Bao. We're just helping each other." Bao Dingheng nodded and solemnly said, "Fellow Taoist Li, if we can successfully catch that medicinal mushroom this time, I can make the decision to give you the best quality one." Zhang Yan laughed and said, "That's good. I'm ashamed to accept it." Although he had come for the Ganoderma ancestor, this time, if a good medicinal mushroom was offered to him, he naturally wouldn't refuse. Bao Dingheng was stunned. He didn't expect this Li Yuanba to be so blunt. He felt a little awkward, but he could only squeeze out a smile and nod at him. While they were talking, the last person on Lan Yuchen's side was also cut down by a sword. Fang He descended from the cloud and came up to Bao Dingheng. He said in a low voice, "Senior Marshal Brother, forgive me for my incompetence, but one person managed to escape." A white-robed Taoist holding a sword beside him said, "You can't blame Senior Marshal Brother Fang. This guy is really cunning. He managed to escape before Lan Yuchen died." When Bao Dingheng heard this, he didn't blame him. He pondered for a while and said, "Then we'll have to hurry up. This person isn't important, but if he sees something and leads others here, I'm afraid it'll ruin our plan." Fang He hurriedly said, "Yes, yes, yes. The Ganoderma is important. Mr. Shi, I'll go invite Mr. Shi over right now." He turned around and went out. After a while, he returned with Mr. Shi and Ku Xiujuan. Bao Dingheng didn't wait for the 2 of them to come closer. He took the initiative to step forward and asked with an inquisitive look in his eyes, "Mr. Shi, how is it? Did our previous battle startle the medicinal mushrooms?" Mr. Shi looked at the white smoke on the stone plate in his hand. Seeing that it had returned to its previous floating state, he said in a low voice, "Taoist Bao, don't worry. We're very lucky this time. The metal qi on these people is too heavy, so it disturbed the wood qi, so we didn't startle the medicinal mushrooms. However, if we were a step later, it would be very difficult to predict." Hearing this, Bao Dingheng's expression relaxed. Although they had Mr. Shi's help, even if they really startled away the medicinal mushrooms this time, they would just have to move to another place. However, he was unwilling to waste so much effort for nothing. Also, who knew what would happen next time? Mr. Shi raised his eyes and looked around again. He said to the crowd, "If we continue forward, we may encounter the medicinal mushrooms at any time. These things are sensitive. If we're within 200 zhang, it will detect the slightest disturbance. Therefore, it is inconvenient for us to fly forward and can only walk. Everyone, please follow me. Do not go the wrong way." After he finished speaking, he held the stone plate and led the way. However, every time he stopped to pay attention to the white smoke, he would change his direction. Zhang Yan also followed behind the crowd. He saw that Mr. Shi would intentionally or unintentionally avoid the advantageous position every time, so he secretly noted this detail in his heart. After the crowd traveled for a dozen or so li, the terrain gradually became higher. Their noses gradually smelled a strange fragrance. Mr. Shi's expression was excited, and his footsteps became lighter. After walking for a few more miles, an open space appeared in front of him. There were only a few trees with lush branches that would take 5 people to wrap their arms around. Strange sounds came from the treetops. At Mr. Shi's signal, the crowd hurriedly held their breaths and stopped. At this moment, it was already early in the morning. Even though the horizon hadn't brightened yet, all of them were cultivators, so their vision wasn't affected in the slightest. When they opened their eyes and looked over, they saw a little boy with a ponytail sitting on the branch of a tall tree, and he was waving his hands and feet towards the moonlight in the sky as he cried out. Mr. Shi gave a low cry of surprise and said excitedly, "We're really lucky. We've actually encountered a shape-shifting medicinal mushroom. Target equals _blank." Chapter 230. Shape-shifting Ganoderma, rare even in 1,000 years. Light shone in Mr. Shi's murky eyes. He sighed and said, "My Shi clan has passed down the art of searching for Ganoderma for generations, but I've only seen records of shape-shifting Ganoderma in books and records. I've never seen the real thing. Just now, I've opened my eyes. It seems that only this isolated place with dense spiritual chi can give birth to such a spiritual thing." He looked at the boy a few more times, a look of pity in his eyes. Once the Ganoderma transformed, it could walk around freely and go to high places to absorb the essence of the sun and moon. If they didn't run into it today, it wouldn't be an extravagant hope to become an immortal after a few thousand years. But now that Bao Dingheng and his people saw it, they couldn't avoid this disaster. Fang He didn't care about what he was thinking. He just asked anxiously, "Mr. Shi, how do we capture this thing?" Mr. Shi frowned and sighed. "It's not difficult. We just need one person to cut off the roots of the tree, then block it with metal chi to prevent it from burrowing into the ground. Then we can send someone up to capture it. We'll definitely be able to capture it." Fang He was overjoyed. "That's easy. I can do it." He was about to move when Bao Dingheng pulled him back. "Junior apprentice brother, wait. I still have a few questions to ask Mr. Shi." He turned around and bowed to Mr. Shi. "Is this the only Ganoderma here?" Mr. Shi thought for a while and said with certainty, "It was. With this shape-shifting Ganoderma here, all the essence of spiritual chi will be gathered here. How can it survive?" When Fang He heard this, his expression changed. He secretly glanced at both sides and saw that the rest of the people had different expressions on their faces after hearing this sentence. Bao Dingheng's expression didn't change. He nodded and said in a low voice, "Then, for the sake of safety, I will be the one to cut down the tree. What do you think?" Among the crowd, since he had the highest prestige and cultivation, and the Yuan Yang sword sect was famous for its swordsmanship, no one had any objections. The Taoist with the tall hat even said, "Taoist Bao's swordsmanship is brilliant. We will be at ease if you become famous." Bao Dingheng laughed and said, "Dao brother Gao is too kind. It's just that the person who catches the Ganoderma needs to be nimble. Who do you all prefer?" Taoist Gao turned around and discussed with the other 3 in a low voice. Then he walked over and pointed at Zhang Yan, saying, "We've decided. Fellow Taoist Li is a cultivator of the strength path. His movements are faster than ours, so he is the most suitable person to step forward." Bao Dingheng gave Taoist Gao a deep look. He then looked at Zhang Yan and asked, Fellow Taoist Li, do you have any difficulties? Zhang Yan smiled. He said, since fellow Taoists think highly of me, I won't let you down. All right. Bao Dingheng then said to General Shi, General Shi is well versed in the art of catching Ganoderma. I'll have to trouble you to bring Brother Li to a suitable place to make his move. Elder Shi nodded. He glanced at Zhang Yan and said in a friendly tone, Little brother, come with me. After the two of them disappeared into the forest, Bao Dingheng called everyone closer and gave them a few instructions. He wanted them to stand guard in all directions. On one hand, he was afraid that Zhang Yan would make a mistake. The herb had escaped somewhere else. Secondly, it was to prevent anyone from spying on them in the dark. This arrangement was also reasonable. Thus, the few of them happily accepted the order and left. After the crowd dispersed, Bao Dingheng stood where he was and did not move. No one knew what he was thinking. Not long after, Fang He quietly turned around. There was no surprise on his face. He glanced left and right and said in a low voice, Junior brother, you gave me a look just now. Do you have something to say to me? Fang He tiptoed over and said softly, Senior brother, let me ask you something. What are you going to do with this morphing Ganoderma? Bao Dingheng's expression changed slightly. He said, Junior brother, if you have something to say, just say it. Fang He glanced around a few times. After making sure that there was no one around, he lowered his voice and said, Senior brother, this morphing Ganoderma is rare to see in 1,000 years. I don't believe that Gaoing Tu and the others are not tempted. Bao Dingheng also knew that although Priest Gao and the others had some dealings with him, they were not necessarily on good terms. It was only because they had the same goal this time that they gathered together. Just now, these four people were unwilling to make a move just because they heard of Lan Yuchen's name. From this, it could be imagined that they were just a combination of interests. If they encountered something that involved their own safety, they would only look on coldly from the sidelines. But if they encountered something beneficial, they would probably swarm forward. As for whether these four people would fall out with them for this morphing Ganoderma, Bao Dingheng was also not sure. Fang He said again, this morphing Ganoderma can only be used by 3 or 4 people at most. Even so, it will greatly reduce its medicinal effect. Therefore, if there is one less person, it is one more person. You and I understand this, and so do Gaoing Tu and the others. Hearing this, Bao Dingheng's pupils shrank slightly. Fang He was selfish. Although Priest Gao and the others might not do so, he would rather think so. In the mortal world, wealth moved people's hearts. How could cultivators be willing to share such an item that was hard to find in 1,000 years with others? It would be best if they could enjoy it alone. Even if they could not, it would be better if there was one less person who could share it. Bao Dingheng also knew the reason behind this, but he still hesitated. Seeing that he was still silent, Fang He stomped his feet and said, Senior brother, if you don't make a decision, you will only get yourself into trouble. If we wait for them to make a move first, I'm afraid it will be too late. Bao Dingheng's heart palpitated, and a murderous intent appeared in his eyes. He slowly nodded and said, All right, we'll do as Junior brother says. It's just that if the two of us make a move rashly, I'm afraid that Li Yuanba and Marshal Nephew Ku will be suspicious and won't stand on our side. You also saw just now that Li Yuanba's cultivation is profound, not inferior to mine. However, Fang He smiled strangely and said, Senior brother, don't worry. I have a plan that can help Senior brother out of trouble. Bao Dingheng looked at him in surprise and said, Oh? Junior brother, please speak. Fang He chuckled and said, Didn't Senior brother say earlier that you want to give the medicinal herb of the highest quality to that Li Yuanba? In Junior brother's opinion, after obtaining this medicinal herb, there's no harm in giving it to him first. Bao Dingheng was a little puzzled at first, but a moment later he realized something. The hand that was stroking his beard suddenly paused, and he glanced at Fang He and said, Junior brother, good plan. To be honest, he did not have a deep relationship with Zhang Yan. At most, only Ku Xiujuan was closer to him, and she was a wandering cultivator with no background. Priest Gao and the others were also clear about this, or else they would not have pushed Zhang Yan out to capture the medicinal herb earlier. It was precisely because he had nothing to do with the two that they were at ease, not afraid that he would directly escape after taking the medicinal herb. Therefore, if the medicinal herb was given to Zhang Yan, as long as Priest Gao and the others had a suitable opportunity, they would most likely make a move to snatch it. It was as if Fang He had thrown out a bait to trigger the two sides to fight. Then, they would be able to sit back and reap the benefits. However, at this moment, Bao Dingheng felt vigilant for no reason. He had never imagined that this seemingly innocent and shallow junior brother could actually come up with such an idea. However, his expression did not change as he said, "This matter needs to be carefully planned." Fang He proudly said, "Don't worry, Shi Xiang. I've already thought it through." He moved closer and whispered something in Bao Dingheng's ear. After Bao Dingheng heard this, he shook his head and said, "Gowing 2 and the other 3 aren't easy to fool. How could he be fooled so easily?" Fang He laughed sinisterly and said, "Senior martial brother, haven't you heard of the phrase, blinded by greed? With such a good thing in front of him. We have given them such a good opportunity, how could they not seize it? As long as one of them is interested, they will have no choice but to act." Bao Dingheng thought about it. He said in a deep voice, "All right, let's do it that way. Leave quickly. I'm going to make a move as well, lest they suspect anything." Fang He responded and flashed away. Then he disappeared into the forest. Bao Dingheng thought to himself, "Martial nephew Ku. For the sake of this spiritual item, I'm afraid I'll have to let you down." Although he and Xiujuan's mother had once been of the same sect. But in front of this precious Ganoderma, what was it? Besides, as long as he did it cleanly, who would know that he was the one who did it? As he thought of this, he made up his mind. He slowly raised his gaze and focused on the green pine on which the Ganoderma boy was sitting. With a thought, a beam of white tiger pure fiend profound light flew out from his head and turned into a sword rainbow. In the blink of an eye, it traversed a distance of several dozen zhang and sank into the bottom of the tree, cutting off its roots. This commotion naturally alarmed the little boy. His face paled, and with a cry, he burrowed into the giant tree, disappearing without a trace in an instant. The onlookers at the side panicked and scurried out of their hiding places. Bao Dingheng was knowledgeable. He first leapt forward and then shouted, "Everyone, don't panic. This Ganoderma is only using the wood to hide itself. After entering the belly of the tree, I have already cut off the roots and used the metal chi to block the chi channels. It can't escape." Hearing this, everyone settled down just now. At this time, a gust of wind blew from somewhere. The crown of the tree swayed, and a few branches broke off. Bao Dingheng smiled and said, "Petty tricks. Do you think I can't see through it?" With a shake of his shoulder, a few sword chi flew out from the top of his head. Just as the branches and leaves were about to be shredded, a scream came from one of the broken branches. A figure flew out and was about to scurry up another tree not far away. Zhang Yan had already been instructed by Sir Shi to hide near this big tree and didn't come out just now. Now that he saw the little boy walking into the trap, he was also impressed. He shouted and leapt forward. With a stretch of his arm, he easily caught the little boy in his hand. After landing, he held the Ganoderma in front of his eyes. He saw that the little boy was only the size of a palm. At this moment, his face was filled with terror. His two white lotus-like hands were wiping away his tears, and his mouth was making sobbing sounds. Bao Dingheng laughed loudly and walked over. His eyes flickered as he said, "Fellow Taoist Li, earlier I said that if we obtain a superior Ganoderma, fellow Taoist can choose it. Now that this item is in fellow Taoist's hands, I'll give it to you." When the person behind Taoist Gao heard this, he immediately became anxious. Just as he was about to speak, he was stopped by Taoist Gao. Taoist Gao gave him a look and shook his head slightly. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He immediately felt that something was wrong. Such a transformed Ganoderma was hard to come by in 1,000 years. He didn't believe that Bao Dingheng didn't want to keep it. Even if he wanted to give it to him, under normal circumstances, he should have discussed it with everyone. After all, the other party had only made a verbal agreement with him. It couldn't be taken seriously. Taking a step back, even if he was sincere, there was no need to be in such a hurry. Now, it seemed like he couldn't wait to give it to him. It was a bit too deliberate. Several thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. He glanced at Taoist Gao and the others without batting an eyelid. He immediately guessed most of their intentions. He snorted coldly in his heart, but on the surface, he didn't refuse and said with a smile, "All right, since Taoist Bao has decided, I'll accept it." Fang He saw that he took it so readily and sneered to himself, "Junior, I'm afraid that you'll have the life to take the treasure today, but not the life to enjoy it." Target equals _blank. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.